I'll just give it like a couple more minutes for people to filter in.
That sounds good. I'm just kind of like warming up my hands so that when I go to do paint overs, it's not real clumsy.
You just do that right now. I looked away for 2 seconds and was some cool clouds.
Yeah, I was looking at the art book for Dune.
Oh yeah.
It just makes you want to paint sandy clouds.
Dust storms.
That's just such a good visual adaptation. It's really hard for me to enjoy a science fiction film's point of view on like science fiction itself. You just tend to get a lot of like glowy, loud.
Right.
Yeah, I just love how Villeneuve like handles stuff. Like Arrival was just, I can still watch that movie just about every day of the week if I had time. But I would be interested to watch it that often. It's really good.
Did you see the original?
The Lynch one?
Yeah.
It has been on my list, but like everyone kind of agrees it's not great, even Lynch. So like it's just hard to make it a high priority.
It's worth seeing, like especially visually, and it's pretty good in the beginning. It just completely falls apart like by the middle of it, but I still think it's worth seeing.
All right, that's fair. Completely falls apart. Yeah, I guess it's kind of a difficult plot to adapt.
Oh, it's extremely difficult. I read the books. I got through 4 of them last year. I was trying to get through everything, but it was getting to be a marathon.
Yeah, how many are there? Like 7?
I think there's 6 or 7 main ones. Then there's some like that his son wrote.
Oh yeah, that like further flesh out the world.
Yeah. I think there's 6 main ones.
That's a lot of books. I'm not for as much of this stuff as I draw, I like, I end up reading a lot of that, and then I don't have a lot of room left for extra fiction. So when I'm sort of like left to my own devices, I tend to go for nonfiction.
When you're doing like a book cover, do you read the whole book?
Yeah. Normally, I mean, sometimes it's not available, or they just different publishers treat it different ways. But if I can, I tend to. It's more work, but and like especially if the book's challenging to read. My buddy Micah Epstein has a good rule for when he's working on covers, which is the 100 pages rule. He'll try to read the book, and if after 100 pages it's like still rough, he's just like, you know what, if you couldn't hook me in 100 pages, like I'm doing your cover from my mind. I'm gonna invent what it, how cool this book could have been. Like everything I wanted to change about the 100 pages is what I'll make, as a portrait of for the cover.
I think that probably used to be more the case too, because like those old Pulp Fiction sci-fi books, like the cover rarely relates to the story in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah. I don't know if that's just, a lot more effort to like print and send over the manuscript via FedEx or whatever. Whereas now they can just kind of email it to you. Heard you just started a value course. How's that going?
Yeah, I started last week. It's going really well. No, I have no sense of time anymore, honestly.
I think it was like within this past week.
I started last week, and the second class was yesterday. And
okay.
It's going well. It's a lot of stuff that I like go over in my mentorships, because like we were saying, like everything is really always the same critique, but I really get to like slow down because I have way more time per class and 3 more weeks than I do in a mentorship. So it's like all the kind of technical stuff that I usually go over in a mentorship, like really slow down, kind of get into that fundamental stuff, but it's really good. And then today, Callan Jett started his VizDev class, and it was so cool. He went over like his experience working on animated movies and showed like how stuff changed through the process. I feel very lucky I get to see, like, have a front row seat to all this stuff.
Yeah, dude. And Kellen can just really draw.
He's amazing. It's so much fun looking at his stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, if you bump into him, tell him I said hey.
Oh, I definitely will.
On the opposite coast, so especially during like COVID and stuff, like you never see people.
Yeah, he wanted to make it tonight, but he's exhausted after his class. It basically just finished.
Okay, makes sense. I mean, I don't know about anybody else. Maybe you could speak to this, but you know, when I'm teaching, like afterwards, me and like pretty much everyone in the class are all just like brain dead horses. Like it's not pretty. Everybody needs a nap. Yeah,
that's like it's been my classes and like the other classes did, so it's like it feels like a marathon for me, but I think I'm gonna get used to it. But I definitely feeling the fatigue of it.
Yeah, and that's like a lot of what you're doing right now, right? So you probably fatigued out a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely, but I love it. It's really, really fun.
Yeah, I mean, what's your favorite part of all that? I know some teachers, they like really enjoy seeing progress. Others, it's more about having the chance to explore those elements for themselves. And I think all the different motivations are good, but I'm just curious.
I feel like earlier I used to like come up with a lot of theories and like ways to explain things to people. I feel like over the course of like 2 years, I have a pretty good backlog of like ways to explain stuff. So I haven't been focused quite as much on like the research and development side of like teaching. Now it's mostly like, and I think it always has been, like the most fulfilling part is seeing the progress of a student who's there at like the exact right time. Like they have the motivation and the right questions, and like I can just provide kind of those answers, and then the level just like skyrockets immediately. There's been a couple that with like mentorships lately, and in the various classes too, like in the color class, some of the students have just been like really running with the stuff and like seeing art in a whole new way. And that's just what keeps you going with it. Like that's the most amazing part of like whenever you get those like mind-blowing moments and then you see it in the work like the next week.
Yeah, and with color and especially value, that's really possible. Like you don't need to put in like 40 more, years of pencil mileage to
exactly.
Value.
I say that, but that's why I love teaching value, because like in the course of maybe 3 or 4 weeks, you can completely change the way that you approach this. And like, it's more of like a mental switch that flips rather than like the hours and hours of mileage when you're trying to get better at drawing. There's obviously like drawing revelations that can happen too, but like the work that you have to put in, I think is a lot steeper to actually see the benefits of it. Yeah.
And I mean, to that point, I think it makes drawing practice all the more valuable because it's more about the accumulation of small gains. And I've seen sometimes like, I've had moments where like I've been teaching someone about like how to draw where they're thinking in 3 dimensions instead of 2 dimensions. And like when that switch, it's like another one of those switches where it's like suddenly they're drawing in a whole different paradigm and that can happen. But then inside of each paradigm, it's like, well, now I just got to learn to draw everything.
Those very long plateaus, I think.
I mean, you can kind of draw everything the same way as long as you know how it's built. So like
there's that saying, like, you know how to draw everything about one thing, you know how to draw everything basically.
Wait, what?
Like if you know everything about how to draw one thing, like say like a portrait or like everything about the head, then like those principles apply to like anything else you would be able to draw.
Yeah, they do. That's absolutely true.
But I think drawing is kind of the big bottleneck after a while. So I think like,
for a lot of people. And I mean, it's really just like everybody comes to it differently. I think there's a certain amount of, you're talking about a student who's like there at the right time. A lot of times that's like, they come like in a way, I don't know how this sounds, but like you're almost desperate for the answers at a certain point. Like you're just like, I've tried everything. It's not working. Like, here I am. What the heck, man? What's going on? And if you have the right teacher there at that exact moment, then you can really fly. Kind of like gotta just give up on what you think you know at a lot of points. And
that's sorry, go on.
No, it sounds like, we have a lot of similar experience with teaching, it sounds like, but like removing concepts is just as important part of my job in helping people as adding them. In fact, more of my effort.
I say this. I think it's the same thing with me. Like a lot of just built up bad habits and like models of thinking that aren't helpful, and like really simplifying that, taking things away that are overcomplicating things, and like getting a much more useful and simple framework to be approaching this stuff, I think is like, that was the biggest help for me.
Yeah,
get rid of all those like rules.
Yeah, that pragmatic framework that's like,
Yeah,
because I think a lot of people think that when they're getting started or earlier in their career, they're keeping like a lot in mind, and they're thinking that like more advanced artists are keeping even more in mind.
exactly what I think, the less.
All the time. But yeah, truly they're thinking less, and that's been found in like just about every field of performance that's been studied. So it seems like a pretty good general principle. And so trying to just go, okay, I know you think about value this way, and like you've had success with that, but like you can think about it less and still get a better result, and this is how.
Yeah, I find that there's like, teaching complete beginners is pretty fun, because like there really isn't any of those bad habits yet, or at least they're not like so deeply ingrained. And then there's people with a little bit more experience, and you kind of usually get like drawing skills, so things go faster because they already have like that mileage in terms of like at least putting form in space. And then I think the most difficult place to be is like if you've been in the industry for like 20 years and like don't care about what you're doing anymore, and like you want to be doing something differently, but you only know how to do one thing. Like that's, I think, the most frustrating place to be as a student. I think of like, in that case, it's just like sometimes taking a break from things and like getting a kind of a reset can be useful.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. I haven't worked with anybody like that. That sounds like a really fascinating experience that'll like basically take someone like, I mean, I'm just pulling a name out of the hat of someone who had a similar style for a long time. But like, if you had to like, if Larry Elmore came to you and was like, I want to be different. Whoa. Like,
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It becomes more like providing a safe place to fail, I think, is what I do in those cases. Because it can be really scary when like you're doing something, especially you're making money from it.
Oh yeah.
You just realize like I'm not passionate about this anymore.
Do you tend to find in that case that like, what am I trying to ask you? Do you like separating finished work from the study, or do you like to try and incorporate study into people's finished
I try and do both. And what I say right at the beginning is like there's two lanes to homework and to exploration. There's like I provide like homework that is very rigid in terms of the tools that you're able to use. So for example, like two value painting, where two values, no pen pressure, round brush, and as a way to like explore principles in a certain way to get you thinking about them in a certain way. The other kind of like lane of the homework is like trying to fail spectacularly in pursuit of your goals. And sometimes you even have to like think about, what are my goals? Like, what do I want to be doing with this? And then just making the attempt. Because if we make the attempt at the same time as studying all the principles, we can actually apply the principles to something. So with most cases, I'm like focusing on those two things happening at once. I think that's the best way to like be applying the education while it's happening.
Man, that is remarkably similar to what I would have someone do in that case. So that's actually pretty cool to hear. But yeah, I was kind of hoping you'd give me some other secrets. Come on.
I mean, it's like you said, like there really isn't too many like secrets to this stuff. It's just kind of these big things.
On the other hand, like it can be very frustrating when you're getting started. It feels like there are secrets. And I think part of that is that like the internet is not always the best vehicle for conveying some of this information, because like
you get the clickbait stuff.
Yeah, you get that stuff because that stuff's designed to help Instagram and the people who are selling that stuff. And like, we're all kind of convinced that that has to occur or like needs to exist to some degree, or that that's where it is. And like that likes is the same thing as skills. And I don't know, there's like a lot of convoluted ideas, and really like the way you can learn something so fast if you just have one person that knows it, you trust them completely, and just open up your mind. Like that's really, it's so fast. And usually that costs the most money. So people try everything else first. But when you're learning, I mean, if you want to be an artist and you're not to where you want to be, or if you are an artist and you want to be further than you are, you can't like sit around counting the costs. You can't like penny pinch on your own development, because you have decades and decades and decades of time in front of you. So everything that you learn now is going to pay increased dividends over the course of your life. Like if you're going to invest in something, invest in yourself.
Yeah. And it's like, it's hard to know. And like following YouTube tutorials or like finding random things, you're investing time anyway in things that could just lead to bad habits down the road. And like, having somebody to tell you like this is a good or a bad resource who's like been through it is really valuable.
Yeah, and I want to like just say this for anyone that's listening who's like maybe looking for a teacher, that if your teacher hasn't done what you want to do, don't listen to them.
Yeah,
Like,
if you don't care about their work also.
yeah, like your teacher needs to, you can always judge a teacher by like how far have they gone or how far has their best student gone, because some people really do put themselves more into teaching and they just don't get in the ring that often, so to speak, but they're amazing. And so you can look at those people and like, you know, and then there's some people where it's like they have both. Like Casey Bach learned from Richard Schmid. Casey's amazing, so that's a great, you know, not that Richard needed the feather in his cap, but that shows he can teach, and his work was incredible. That shows he can do it. That's a good, you know, if he was still around, I would say there's your man.
Yeah, also that's like, it's good to be judgmental in these cases.
Oh yeah,
like, not every teacher or form of education is like equally helpful, and again, some of it is like can set you back. So if you have like a gut feeling about something really bad, like you said, like the teacher's work and the student work, that's really what you should be following. If it doesn't feel right, then definitely kind of like listen to that instinct.
Yeah, absolutely. And just back, you know, piggybacking off what you said there, like the most important thing about who you would allow yourself to be educated by is that you click with them. You feel like you think in a similar way, because there are so many different ways to think and a lot of different ways to get to the same place.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if you try to listen to every teacher out there, like, you know, you're just going to run in circles, because they're all going to be leading you a little bit in this direction, a little bit in that.
And you don't want to like feel pressure to become like them, and then you have to just undo everything by the time you're done with that education because you realize it's not working for you.
Yeah. Yep. So you don't want that. Anyway, let's jump into like the meat of all this stuff, because it sounds like
it looks like we got a cool dune painting like for free here.
slowly coming to, I mean, this is just the kind of thing I would do like in the morning when I'm working intelligently. I will take the time to warm up. When I let myself get into the panic zone, I will not do that, and then all day I'm worse. So just this like gets my hand moving and gets me thinking a little more, so that I can be more effective with this stuff. Let's like crack open the Pure Ref board, I guess, unless if there's other stuff you want to talk about before we jump into that.
You want to give us like a quick background about what your experience is and with, I guess, like teaching and also what you do for work?
Sure. I dropped out of art school in 2012 to start working at an animation studio here in Atlanta that had just opened. This was right around the time
Atlanta.
What?
This guy lives in Atlanta.
I think George Booker just yelled that I live in Atlanta. Sure thing. Hope sounds like you do too. That's very cool. City's growing. Shoot, what was I talking about? Oh yeah. So they started offering like how certain other cities do, where it's like if you make a production for television here, it's like you get a 30% tax write-off or something like that.
Right.
Pretty extensive. And so there was like a new animation studio opening up, and one of my teachers, who has been like my long-term mentor, and he's actually conducting my wedding here in October, Brian Stelfreeze, he was just like, you know, like, you don't need to be here, like go, here's like the name of the guy who runs the studio, go apply for this, I think you'll get it. And I did. So I just like hopped on that, and then about a year later I switched studios to work on Archer with FX, and I worked on that for like 9 months during Archer Vice. And then after that,
What were you doing on that?
jumped ship to go freelance. I was doing characters, so like Archer's animated in After Effects, which means there's not a lot of drawing tools, so all the drawing elements are composed in Illustrator, so it was all vector stuff.
Is that common, After Effects, for a show like that?
I don't know.
It doesn't seem like it. It seems like
Doesn't seem like
the job.
The studio I came from before that, and a number of others now use Toon Boom, but like I've been out of the industry now for like a decade. Because after that I just moved into freelance, and you know, started doing like just the kind of things I had wanted to do up till that time, like magic cards. And I started getting a few book covers thanks to the grace of a few specific art directors, and everything kind of progressed from there. And Now I'm starting to transition from that into more concept art, and I'm also doing teaching, just because, I guess you did ask about like my history with teaching. I started teaching at the school I dropped out of like 3 weeks after I left. They needed somebody. It was a small trade school with not a very big illustration program. And they were like, do you want to teach digital painting? And I thought, no way. And Brian said, yeah, you should do it. You're more qualified than you think. And so I used that to just start exploring teaching. But really, I think students don't always know this, that like the teacher's learning just as much, sometimes more.
Yeah.
Teaching can be like, I don't mean this negatively, but even if your motivation is like very selfish, you can be quite a good teacher.
I think it's even better. Like if you use teaching as an opportunity to explore things for yourself, like I think it helps the students even more to kind of like, because I think it makes you more passionate about what you're doing.
And more experience, right?
Yeah.
You're spending your days and nights like thinking about fundamentals.
Exactly.
Instead of, whenever I've been teaching, I make some of my better work.
Yeah.
But oftentimes it's like, okay, it gets overwhelming. I have to like choose one or the other. But I've been teaching on and off and doing like, I did a couple classes for visual arts passage back in like 2016, 2017. And then, shoot, what was the other thing I was gonna say? Oh, just like you, like doing private mentorships and stuff up till now when I'm doing the goat farm, which is like custom mentorship meets Top Gun. So it's kind of like takes a team format. And here we are now.
How did you come up with that concept of like having it's kind of like the best of both worlds between a group class and something more individual?
Took me a while to get to it because I was actually pretty convinced that if I didn't work one-on-one with people, I was kind of like scamming them.
Right.
Because I was like so sure that level of like, if you had like an incredibly high level student that needed just like very specific work on a few things at incredible levels of reps and they needed tons of feedback, yeah, maybe that would be true. But you also, what I didn't realize at the time was like you miss out on a lot of stuff that is available when you have a team. When you have like a one-on-one interaction with a teacher, it can be kind of, it feels very like it's like a laser beam of attention that's on
it's
you.
different.
Yeah, it can almost get sort of like, for the student, it can be difficult to decipher like what's the teacher's opinion, what is fact, where do my thoughts fit into this. And so I did a lot of reading on this kind of stuff, like the history of Top Gun and the Navy SEALs, and just education like sort of at large, because I'm really into that stuff. Like, at a certain point, it doesn't make sense in every career to like always be paying out, like crazy for classes and stuff. And sometimes you just don't have the money for that. So it was like, how do I teach myself? Like, what's an effective teaching regimen, and how can it be sort of like self-authored and executed? So there's like a lot of years in there of learning, like what are the fundamentals, not of art, but of practice. And then how do I apply those for myself? And now I have all that information, but what I find is that like, if someone says like, oh, I'm struggling with this, and I'm not sure what to do, after having practiced coming up with different exercises for art training, I can pretty quickly come to think of like, oh yeah, you could do this day, this day. And then based on the results, you could progress to this, or, whatever. It takes a lot of different forms, but that kind of stuff is really fun for me. I like learning for its own sake.
Yeah.
It's more
Sorry.
No, you're good. I got it. Yeah, it's just fun. Like, I don't know. Early on, Brian told me something that like at the time I was like, really, you think so? Because I wasn't making any money off of art yet. And he was like, it's pretty boring being an illustrator sometimes. So you really need to fall in love with other parts of it than just finishing pictures. Because
it gets to be, if you only do that.
Yeah, it certainly can. So I need the variety too. I like it. And then it's like, yeah, another whole angle of attack, the same way that you have like 2 tracks that you would have a student working on in practice at the same time. For me, if I'm teaching stuff and learning it, and like also it's like you feel this feeling of like people are clawing at your heels, like you got to get good, got to try to like make sure you have something to offer them.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's nice too.
Yeah, I want to ask a question about what you're working on now, because I think it might get to kind of one of these big principles. So why are you working so zoomed out?
Well, nothing about the painting matters yet, so it's an easier place to work from. There's a saying I've been looking at or repeating a lot recently, it seems, which I think came from the Greek philosopher Archimedes, which was like, if you gave me a place to stand and a long enough lever, I could move the earth.
Mhm.
And so with art, a lot of what I'm doing with my own students is I'm always trying to get them to a position of maximum leverage so that, you know, if you work more zoomed out, yeah, you're not going to necessarily be able to do every little detail, but everything you come up with, every mark you make, like if we go back, this big like dust cloud over this, there's just no way to draw that from this distance. You can't even think that thought at this distance. So, you know, once I had kind of like a base, I started doing some stuff in here and I was like, wow, that's not where I'm at yet. So let's jump back. And now I've overshot and I've got more of these like other elements in here because we've been talking, which points to another great principle, which is don't multitask because it's not real. But yeah, I just stay further back to keep an eye on things. I mean, I keep the navigator open all the time for the same reason. And also, and I'm going to get to this in my crits a lot, but I really only think of the piece in 2 values, max 3. And if I go further than that, I know I'm kind of messing up. So, you know, like right now I can, like when I ghosted back this mountain range and the ground back here, it was like, all right, big black shape, another big dark shape, and then this kind of L of light. But that sort of like takes the feeling of impact off the ship. So if I just blast out the ground, the scale changes dramatically. And that's the kind of thing that it feels like changing one big plane of value wouldn't have that effect, but it does because that's the basic division of the piece of artwork.
Yeah, it reminds me of like a big problem usually, and you know, the frustration with art is just overcomplicating things, like zooming in too far where you're losing the forest for the trees, thinking it's about details, thinking in too many values. When you simplify it, you can focus on the bigger problems. I think it's a good example of this.
All right, man. Well, I'm gonna stop messing with this. Let's get into pure ref. All right. So I'm fairly new to pure ref, so I'm gonna just.
Sorry about that. It could be like playing a video game at first, like keyboard shortcuts.
I think I've got it. I'm using this as an excuse to try it out because I'm pretty wary of new tools. You know, in like when you spend 10 years learning to or trying to learn to simplify for the sake of efficiency, then you become very like skeptical of new tools and ideas. But I see a lot of people using this one right now. So I also think it's important to temper that skepticism with like pretty aggressive trying.
I'm definitely the same way. I'm not like an easy adopter of things. Pure ref happened to like make the cut. I found it that useful.
Nice. Yeah, it looks like it's occupying a fairly similar position as like Adobe Bridge for me. So I'll have to just see.
Yeah.
All right. This one is from Eva. 17 years old artist. Well, that's awesome. I didn't even start painting until I was 19 and decided I wanted to be an artist. I was 20. So this is pretty awesome. Just want to say that off the bat. I've always had problems. So for a maximum of like 12 years, making readable shadows. They always struggle from lack of contrast and look faded. The attached work started well. The woman wears a cloak or mantle made from different wings. I was listening to a lot of Nord folk while making it, so there's an echo of something Celtic. But eventually, I'm not happy with it. This looks unnatural and just doesn't work. Like all the elements are independent and don't stick together. Could have kept working on this piece, but sometimes you just have to abandon an artwork because staying on it for too long is bad. And at some point, you need to let unsuccessful artworks be unsuccessful. I would like to have some help with the contrast and shadows and just an advanced eye to look at it and an advanced hand to touch it. I hope you can show me with this example how to make an artwork look like one piece, how to connect all the elements and make them look cohesive and convincing. All right, well, it's a pretty specific ask, and I think it's good because this starts us in a place of value since it's in black and white. Also, the jokes about being 17 are meant to be compliments. That's a great place to be at that age. Like I might be able to pull up later some of the art I did when I was 3 or 4 years older than that, and it's
Yeah, this is a really good place to be.
yeah. So, and also you have all your neuroplasticity, like, which is awesome. Around the age of 25, your neuroplasticity takes a swan dive as your prefrontal cortex finishes firming up. So you have a lot more self-control, but also it takes a lot more effort to learn new skills, which is kind of like a bonk trade-off, if you ask me. So, because you need self-control in some ways, but like a lot of people want self-control so they can sit down and practice or get better at stuff.
Yeah.
And trade off the ability to learn as readily. So anyway, yeah, get it in while you can. Let's take this into Photoshop and mess around with this. I did also want to talk about some of these statements in here. This looks unnatural and doesn't work. The success of every piece is on a spectrum. So like, remember that. And I'm probably going to quote him a lot tonight because he's really good at coming up with like pithy little things to say that somehow feel really useful. But Brian always talked about finished artwork as like the pizza crust in the garbage. Like, this is what clients see and they're like, oh my God, we love this pizza crust. And you're like, you should have seen the meal I ate, man. This is just what I throw away. Like, I am working on all kinds of other stuff. And that's a bit exaggerated because, of course, at a certain point, you're putting finished work out into the world and you want to stand by it to some degree. But if you believe that the artwork is you, it can cause some problems. So I just wanted to point that out, that like most artists feel like all their pieces are a mixture of successes and failures, and it doesn't have to be such a stern line. I myself am pretty guilty of black and white thinking on things like that. Like, I love the piece or it's crap. And I don't think you should, if you can, learn to not be that way early. That would be great, because there's a lot of really good stuff in here. Like the wings are already sort of awesome and don't need a lot of work. Let's mess around with it though. It's weird. Everything in PureRef comes in with 96 PPI, which is just strange. All right, so I'm going to treat this in a couple different parts. The background has kind of like a wild nature right now, which is quite interesting actually, but it's a little divorced from the nature of the foreground elements, which are more, it looks like you really came in here and spent some time and maybe had some reference for different wings that you painted from. And I think all that looks great. I'm not sure. Sometimes with people, what you see is when they're less confident with an area, they get more expressive. And so there's this kind of natural gradation. The other thing that can happen is like, if you look at like a John J. Park cloud study and then you try to paint a really tight piece, you kind of have like some dysphoria because you see like one or two really big marks and you believe, oh, like those clouds had all this expressiveness, but it's really just one or two areas. And so having all this expressiveness everywhere is something that takes away a little bit. My whole way of looking at art, this is going to like cross pretty much all the reviews, is that what we're trying to do, and you don't have to use this framework, by the way, this is just one in many possible frameworks, but the framework I'm using is that I want to portray something as the eye would perceive it, but actually use a lot of principles in advance that prepare, think of it like food. I want to prepare this food for the eye in a way that makes it exciting, easy for the eye to digest, and actually make the eye want to digest it. So when light enters your eye, there's all this stuff that happens, but basically your brain has to like simplify all the information in the world so that you can absorb it and pay attention to what matters and not just be inundated by detail. It sounds really basic, but there's something cool there, which is that if you can open up that the eye and brain do a bunch of stuff and see what they do, you can go ahead and do that stuff. So you basically, I mean, this sounds disgusting, but it's like serving someone a pre-digested meal. Their intestine's not going to have to do anything. And that's actually what we want for the eye. When the eye is looking at something and just feels like, oh, I could look at this forever, it's so engrossing. It's because you're really lazy. Humans are built to seek efficiency. They want to look at things that are pleasing to look at. What that means is just that they're simplified. They already are in color harmony. They already are in a set exposure. All these things that the eye normally has to like parse all this data really quickly. And that little time gap, it's kind of cool. And but what's also kind of frustrating about art, someone, I'm sure we've all had the experience of like show someone something you've been working on for 6 weeks and they go, uh-huh. And then that's it. But But inside that microsecond of them looking, perceiving, understanding, and then nodding approval, there's a lot that can happen. And so when we're controlling things about our artwork, we're controlling perception inside of just a moment of time. And think about like when you're out at night and you see like something go by in the trees, or you're it's like you've just woken up and something happens outside your window and you're like, is that an owl or a person? Because I'm gonna freak out if it's one of those two things. Those little seconds tell us a lot. And I won't get into everything here, but basically we want to approach the image as though we're telling the viewer how they've already seen it. Like, I don't want to present a piece and let the perception be optional. I want to come at it with a real point of view and say, I, the artist, saw it this way, and I want to use a set of fundamental tools that relies on knowledge of how the brain and eye interact to make sure you have that same perception too. If I can present a piece and the focal point is optional, I feel like, I haven't necessarily done my job. So one thing that the eye likes to do is it basically creates like a radial focus. So say that we're looking at the face, then everything in the face is going to be exaggerated. Contrast, vibrancy, and the reason for that is that there's two kinds of cells in your eyes, rods and cones. Rods see contrast and motion. That's how you see at night. They make up 95% of your eye. Cones are detail, small forms, and color, and they only make up 5% of your eye, but they're right where you're looking. So everything like that, all the advanced color and detail and everything will always be strongest wherever you're telling the viewer they're looking, and then it's going to radiate out basically into peripheral vision, which is like why down here you could really easily get away with just blurring some of this. I'm not saying you should, but if I do that, doesn't really change a piece at all, because the perception, you've already done a lot of this. Like, there's more detail and contrast right here, and then you've paid more attention to this, and then down here the contrast is quite low. So like, kudos on that. Same thing up here, you've got more bright light in the clouds, and then down here darkens off into gray, lower contrast, same exact thing. So all that is really working for you. I'm going to leave this mark. One thing I want to mention about this mark, and this is a good thing that I won't have to mention again, basically, because I'll just do it here. Whenever you make a mark like this, when you're making marks out near the edge of the page, like right here in my earlier days of illustration, I would have like tried to finesse this mark and, really like make sure all this was exactly to my liking. But I'm looking at it. I'm looking right at it. If you want to be an efficient painter, when you make marks, you only judge them while looking at your focal point, because that's really what your audience is going to do. Now, you can decide that you're the kind of artist that loves every inch of the painting, and then you just have extra work to do, which is okay. It's really okay. I mean, I don't choose that path, but I have at one point, and you may go in and out of choosing paths like that. But it's a really good I don't always like this word, but this is just a good hack. Like, you don't have to consider this edge as much as you need to consider these edges. And where you look while you make marks can control that perception and keep you from getting stuck in this like Control Z feedback loop. So I'm going to leave all that, but let's mess around with the stuff that you talked about. So let's just mess with the contrast in this focal area. Well, did it twice. Let's just go ahead and get pretty heavy. It's always tricky working over other people's work because you don't have like any layers or anything, which I don't know that I would like recommend painting in a lot of layers, but at the same time, if I'm editing work, it does make it a lot easier.
The magic wand tool is like my secret weapon for that. It just grabs shapes to the point where you don't really need layers.
Yeah, that's true. And the way you control value in your work, it makes a lot of sense that you could use it, like abuse it basically.
Yeah, I find that like sometimes if the magic wand like isn't going to be useful for you, it could even like suggest that there's a problem with like just not enough distinction with your value groups.
Yeah. So right here, what you can see is like I'm actually exaggerating this area. So now if we look at the, I've darkened the darks and lightened the lights in the piece generally, but then also with this extra little layer, I've exaggerated them. So now we have this drift of light, like light is coming in and striking the face, which you've shown through like where you've placed the shadows. I'm just intensifying that light, which is another way of pointing the focus right there. And then I'm going to come through here and just tone down some of these background edges. And one way I like to do that is I have this brush that's just like speckles. I think I got this out of like a darken brush pack, like pretty far back, but a lot of people have a brush that has a shape like this and they all pretty much work the same way. So I'll put the smudge at 90% and then I can just, when I smudge, like if I do it big, you can see it just blurs out the area, but it leaves in texture so you don't lose informational density, which is really nice.
What the?
So I'm just going to mess all these back and just like ubiquitously do that so that I don't really have to think about which ones to keep at first. This is another good strategy working digitally, is that you can overshoot changes and then selectively pull them back. You can also just think, but when you're painting in front of people, sometimes it doesn't make the point as quickly because there's a lot of choices going on in your head while you make every mark. And again, I don't mean that, like we were talking about this when I was painting the ship, is that I don't mean that in like a, I'm really thinking kind of way, but there's basically like, when you like go on your computer and you enter the task manager and you're like, what are you doing right now, computer? And it turns out it's doing like 50 things you've never heard of. But it's not like there's not an open program that's doing 50 things. It's just the computer's checking for updates. It's protecting you from viruses. It's trying to get you to buy stuff from Microsoft. Like it's doing a lot of work, and that's all got to happen beneath the surface. And the artist's mind is like that. So you need a lot of spare processing capacity, but you want to not be actively considering all those things at once. You want to be passively considering all those things at once. Okay, so we've backed all that off, and now there's still some like sharp lines right here. And now what we're going to get into is like that the clouds are going to have some sameness. So I want to just move back to front on this one. And you've got a light source. I don't know if you have reference on this, but your light source is kind of coming in like this. And so I want to emulate that in the clouds. And now we've got this drift where the light is striking here and it's falling off down here. So we can kind of do a similar thing in the clouds. Just use a darker color layer here to make this really easy. And get a very similar kind of drift. I do like how chaotic you've got the background. I think it was Howard Pyle had this list of notes that he gave his students at the Brandywine School. And one of the notes was that if the characters fight or struggle, the background should as well. I always thought that was pretty cool, and it tends to work. So this person seems to be in some turmoil, and I'm digging that the sky is as well. With clouds, one of the things you're really looking at is a lot of variety in edges. Clouds can get really sharp, more than we would think. But the main thing is just to have a concept of lighting. So that, when I'm doing this, I'm kind of thinking of these as just huge cubes and spheres, and I'm gonna light them as such. And I'm taking my lighting cue for the direction off of the face, since that's, a clear set of choices that you already made. And I think it is a clear set of choices from the outside, but the reason that it feels, faces are just the epicenter of the artist's world, basically. Like you're gonna fight with them forever, even when you're really good at them. But it's not that we're bad at painting faces. We're kind of not great at painting everything, and we just can tell with faces. We're biologically hardwired to know about that. it's like important to our survival to be able to read the face of another person and their intentions and things like that. So yeah, I remember James Gurney saying that how he made a piece is that he would paint the face until he couldn't anymore and he thought it was great. Then he would do the rest of the piece. Then he would repeat step one. And he usually found that painting the face took about half the time of the overall piece. And if it needed more, he would give it more. And that was during the time he was painting Dinotopia. So it wasn't like he wasn't a good painter. But, you know, you want to modulate, you know, we talked about depth and contrast. Like I'm actually kind of interested in continuing to lower the contrast back here. You know, if we want to make this more iconic, which we can, just reduce the contrast there to get a stronger silhouette on the figure. But I always want to be keeping in mind too, the two value read, right? So like this figure doesn't have anything connecting it to the rest of the environment now. It's just like this isolated dark shape that's interrupted. Got this, and then we've got this interruption here, which is pretty nice. But I tend to like it when values travel the distance, like we're going to get from here to here with a value, or from here to here. And not a lot of our values are crossing all the way. So I might start to look at how can I make that happen? And I'm just going to kind of go back into paint over mode and abandon any level of like finish for principles. But if I start to bring the wing across, bulk this out. I don't mind tangents right on the edge. I actually really like them, but because of what I'm doing, I'm actually going to extend this wing. Everybody tends to overdo the contrast in hair. I think with black hair, it would be better to have no highlights than loud highlights. So I'm just going to scale a lot of those back. And you'll notice I'm basically reinforcing the solidity of major shapes. I'm not going to worry about rendering too much. I do want to bring back in this dark across the top though. So let's mess with that. There's actually a little more contrast up here, I think. Could be pleasing. Sometimes, you know, the composition has to change to accommodate these kinds of things. Like maybe I'll find that having it dark up here is a little hard to justify. Realists have certain extra constraints. One of them being that, you know, if I want to put a big white shape somewhere, I kind of have to figure out what it is. There's some people that don't have to, like Alex Konevsky can put a white shape anywhere because chaos is like a part of the recipe. But not for everyone. I might be able to just bring this all down and connect that shape. I think that's pretty cool. And I'll probably just double that layer to cement the connection. And then get rid of a part of it. So now you can see like I'm kind of like tracing these different paths of light and dark, trying to figure out which ones are going to please me. And I know, Devin, that I'm spending longer on this first one, but I think we'll be able to reference back to this quite a bit.
Yeah, I think this has like a lot of good concepts you could talk about.
And honestly, being in black and white, like black and white doesn't lead to the most impactful paintings, but it leads to deeper understanding. I think it really, painting effectively in black and white demands that you use these principles, while painting in color only benefits if you do, but can tolerate when you don't. And it's worth noting. Just thinking about different ways, like, do I want the white to travel across the top? Not really. This is getting like a little more iconographic in its composition, but kind of trying to build off of the principles that I felt like were here. So now we've got sort of like a cloud wall back here. This is like a little bit modeled after classic portraiture in some ways, which I think is pretty cool. And there's like a big history of art there to look at. So.
Yeah, right. It's got a bit of like an El Greco thing going on in the background.
Yeah. Definitely. I think with the face, this is the kind of area where, and I would mess around with this on the hands too. Depending on how you want it to feel, you can stay quite loud with the edges like this, but sometimes it's nice to just move a little more methodically through here and soften things up. Color is remarkable for painting faces. So black and white faces, without that color, we have to kind of choose, do we want to simplify our light in order to maintain a graphic read? Or do we want to go with something starker? I think this piece will probably be a little more powerful if we subdue the shadows, but it's going to potentially require some drawing changes. I realize that might seem like I asked how to make the light and shadows seem more concrete, not how to like get rid of them. And that would be a fair point. If we wanted to look at the other way, I would say it's just a matter of nailing the contrast and getting it a bit louder. But honestly, with faces, I think, and this is like a theme I see across teaching that, Devin, I don't know if you can speak to this as well, but a lot of times the answer to the question is to think differently about the question itself. Like, it's not necessary to make these shadows justified. As long as they're in the right place, they could be different contrasts, and that can be a matter of choice. But like, if this was a Sargent painting and we looked at it in black and white, this would all be like the same values. All of this, the values would be much closer together. And these form turns would be accomplished with color. When you are in color, what you can do is turn a form with color. Like if I'm painting this in this color and I need it to seem darker, I can just get more saturated. Now that feels like a pretty massive form change just in the abstract here. But I mean, left and right, that's the same amount of value. Saturated colors feel darker and desaturated colors feel a lot lighter. This is all right across here. So you don't need to mess around with this in a black and white piece, but if we appreciate that, like, that's kind of how faces are and are nicely represented, and there's other ways too. Ah, crap, I forgot to turn this off. Then if this is how faces can be nicely represented in color, then how can we emulate that in black and white? Well, we can downplay the lighting and we can upplay local values and colors, like, eyelashes, eyelids, things in the eyes. There's a lot there. But if we look at this piece from a distance, I think it already has a type of value-based gravitas that didn't necessarily coming in, and that highlights all the work that you have done in things like the wings. It makes them feel so much more elegant. A lot of the times when I'm painting, what I've found is that if something is in the wrong key, it'll feel bad no matter what, and if it's in the right key, it feels good no matter what. Key just being the relative values. So now we've got this much brighter, more subdued set of light shapes, subdued just in its shadows. The light and dark is closer together. So we've got a narrower key on the face that is saying something different about the lighting, but our overall values are punchier.
Yeah, I think it's always good to think about these things in terms of like what the idea is. I think that there's like some nice exposure in the shadows, some range in the shadows with like reflected light coming in there. And if you get rid of that and expose more of the lights, it's going to really change the feel of the painting. And I think it's just kind of focusing on the principles of kind of like how you deal with that information instead of any kind of rule like, oh, you always need like a Terminator line to describe form or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to talk a little bit about exposure for a second? Because I think that's a useful framework that we can use going into some of these other reviews.
Yeah, so I think like the simple explanation of exposure would be that it's a binary thing. Like, are you putting information in the lights or are you putting them in the shadows? Basically, like if you have a lot of information in the lights, eventually you run out of your budget available to you for like showing the information with your medium. So if you put, say, reflected light and a lot of information in there, we won't have room to get the lights far enough away to have that be the right relationship. And the same vice versa. But really, like at its core, that analogy of like it being a camera stops being as useful because it isn't binary. With painting, we can control our contrast in any kind of way. So it's basically just how far do you overstate things? Well, that next decision, you talk about keying, you key a relationship. And then if the next relationship just has to be relatively correct compared to that, which means you can do basically anything that you want with your values as long as you're consistent with your decision making and having the relative relationships be correct. So there's a few like levels of complexity there. I think at its core, it's a very kind of simple thing that can take some thinking to get your head around. But I think that the kind of camera analogy is useful at first and then kind of breaks down a little bit because painting, you have more control than you do with the settings that you do on a camera.
Which is really nice. And yeah, I mean, that description from both of us can tend to come off kind of like sciencey, or it's like a lot of lingo. And so it does tend to seem a little intimidating when it's just dumped like that by both of us. And so normally I will approach it more slowly if I'm working with students, not in like there's a balance to be walked with any student that like, you obviously respect their intelligence. And part of that is doling out information in such a way that it's digestible and useful. Because I've found earlier in my teaching, I would just, if I had something to tell someone, I would say, here's the concept, and then here's the 8th step of the concept. And I would just dump all of that and be like, so you got it now, right? And I come to find out, not only is that not how I learned it, but it's not a very good way to introduce the information. Right. So I like you scaling it down there. And just kind of thinking about, yeah. And this goes back to what I was talking about with, you know, I'm trying to paint to some degree with a type of prejudice towards how eyes perceive. If you're looking into shadows, your eye auto balances the shadows. So the longer you stare into a shadow, the more differences you can see there. I mean, you can prove this yourself so easily. Just go in a bathroom, turn out the light, close the door. You won't be able to see anything. But in a minute or two, you'll be able to see almost everything in the bathroom. It's amazing. The eye can do this, and the camera has like settings that can try to emulate it, but they really don't work quite as well. The eye is an incredibly sophisticated piece of technology. So if you're doing a painting inside a dark bathroom, then you can expand your darks. You can just paint everything in these, you know, in these dark ranges, and you don't want to expand them too much, because if you do, you're not leveraging the eye's ability to spread them apart. You want to put that on your viewer. You want to let them spread the values apart. So like when I look in here, these two values, if everybody will pay attention to this box, this value and this value are not that far apart, but I can totally see the difference between them if I'm staring right here, which is what you want your viewer to do, but you should never do it. If you, the painter, are in here trying to make sure these are crystal clear, you're going to do something like this. You start to expand your range. This is not necessary. And now it looks like light is hitting right here, which is inexplicable or weird. Now, maybe you want this effect. Like if you're painting a magic card and they're like, the wings begin to glow, violating the key could be a very useful way to indicate that that's happening. But in general, yeah, you want to keep things constrained inside of ranges that are narrow and let the human eye, the viewer, expand those ranges for you. I'm going to turn this off so it doesn't do that again, just because we don't have a lot of time. All right. I think that's enough on this one for now in introducing the principles. So I would say just reducing the values in this face, you know, kind of like getting back to the core question is one way to go. The other way would just be to like grossly justify them. So get much starker with the darkness, much brighter with the light. And we tend to shy away from that as artists. We tend to shy away from any strong convicted stance because at first, when we first start to put it in, it feels wrong. Like if I'm, you know, let's say I have this face and then I go to do the shadow. That's the first mark I make. It's like, whoa, what is happening? Is there blood running out of the nose? Like, I just don't know. There's a lot here that feels wrong, but the important thing is not to judge it right away and just to keep going. Nothing bad will happen. Within just a few more marks, I mean, like that starts to feel more correct. We're at a broad distance and I'm painting very loosely. but that feels wrong, totally wrong to me. This feels fine. And one of the good ways to like break yourself of feeling like you need to judge marks as they come down is to watch really competent draftsmen draw live. I don't know if Kim Jung-gi's like Instagram and stuff is still up, but I know a lot of his videos are around. And if you watch him draw and you try to predict in your mind where you would put the next line every time, I always feel like what he just drew is wrong. And by the end of the drawing, it's a great drawing and every mark he made was right. So it's about just not prejudging yourself, not judging too early. We don't need to save these. We don't need to save these, right, Devin?
I don't think you have to say this. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, we can.
Oh, hi. I'm the author of this artwork. Yeah.
Oh, hey.
Hey, yeah, I was here all the time. I feel myself a little bit guilty that I was quiet all the time.
If you have any questions too, you could always ask about anything we went over.
Yeah, I think I want to say thank you first, because I saw how you fixed some of the pieces, and I want to say that like I guess that's my habit to do some of the just objects too sharp, because I used to paint with watercolor a lot, and it was really noticeable in watercolor, and it just screwed all the painting because of this, because that's not how the watercolor works actually. And yeah, I think because of your feedback, I will go back to this work, and I finished this a couple of months ago, and now I just saw how you fixed some of the pieces, and I remember with my eyes much better with my ears. And just to add for me, I think I will do some more work on the hands, because they also seem a little bit unnatural there. And because I guess you can say that I've done them just in the last moment, and they were the last thing which I've done.
Gotcha.
And yeah, and you can see that like the hand, her right hand, just, I don't think that you can see the sleeve there actually, they're just the hand by itself. And maybe I will do something with the dress, because I also didn't pay a lot of attention to this. Yeah, I just want to say thank you, and also maybe for the artist, which artworks will come now. Would you rather them like to speak, or I really don't know. Is it how much would you like the artist to interact with you when you're speaking?
They can interact with me as much as they want, because like if I think I'm giving feedback to a vacuum, it might be the absolute wrong feedback. So yeah, I forgot to say anything about that. But if anybody wants to, if your artwork comes up, just immediately say, "Hi, it's me," and then we'll go from there.
Okay, I want to say I've been there all the time, and I also listen to all your feedback all the time. And
Awesome.
I want to say thank you again. Yeah, it was pretty useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for submitting.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, and just like keep at it. I mean, the most important thing is to not quit. Like I said, I mean, you're ahead of the curve at this age, especially, and it'll be really cool to see what you continue to make. I had one other thing I was going to say here that I thought about while we were talking, but I kind of forgot it. But I am really glad to hear all that. All right. I am going to save these. Why not?
Thank you. I'll take this as a compliment.
Oh, not as JPEG though. Yeah, for sure. All right, let's hop into something else, because let's do this one. All right. Mila, what's up? Are you here?
I think she's asleep. It's late there.
Oh yeah, okay, that's a good point. You never know, man. Thanks for organizing this workshop. It would be awesome to hear your opinion about what I can do to improve my work. So I'm sending a few artworks. Hope you both have a great day. Yeah.
Mila is here. She's in the chat, but she can't talk because it's late. So yeah, Mila, do you have any questions or anything? You can. I'll read it out to him from the chat.
Yeah, that sounds like a perfect thing. Way to handle it. First of all, I mean, awesome work. I don't want to. So there's a thing that tends to happen where if artwork's really good, it actually gets less critique. but I want to make sure that we hit the top end in the middle and the bottom and talk about what everyone can do to improve, because at any level, we want to keep pushing ourselves and getting better. So let's grab this one. At this small size, I got to say a lot of the work is working really excellently. So my guess is that working on some things that are smaller is potentially going to come up. But I mean, I've seen that you're working for Magic, and like your 2-value comps and how you're managing a lot of your paint handling is excellent. So this will be a good exercise in vulnerability for me, because I may not even be able to improve this, you know, who knows? It looks like this is painted in Photoshop. Will you just drop in the chat if that's correct or not?
Yeah, it's Photoshop.
Okay, cool. So first things first, like if we want more depth, we can get it. And if we want more graphic power, we can get it. With the 2-value comp idea, you know, I would be breaking this whole piece down into separate shapes. So I want to do like a basic line drawing of it, because that'll actually be faster. But right now I'm perceiving the darks moving all through here, all this, you know, along here, this kind of stuff. Got nice carry through. I talked about that, but like this big diagonal carrying through here is really nice. Love this flag. Am I correct in assuming that you're a decent fan of Pieters?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Very cool. But a lot of people are fans of his and can't paint a flag that nice and make the connection that someone else will be like, yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, I really love that flag.
Yeah, nice work there. So you can see what I'm kind of doing here is like I'm just picking out, you know, this is how I think of pieces. It's just these big 2-value puzzle pieces. I've talked about this elsewhere, so I'm not going to go crazy on it today, other than to like, you know, kind of, I'm going to keep showing different examples of how it functions and hopefully ingrain a deeper understanding of it by doing that than by just like lecturing about what it is. But, you know, we can come through here and like basically find this set of shapes. And I think honestly, the set of shapes here is like pretty interesting. So, you know, we've got dark moving all through the body. I think the main thing that stands out to me here is the horse's feet sort of disappear to like in the grass, but the grass isn't really painted to seem that tall. And maybe that's like in the bleed, or it's just like kind of in general for the piece, it doesn't really matter. And especially when I look at the piece at any distance, like, you know, it's negligible. But like I said, I want to talk about things that are gonna help. Let's go ahead and jump in with how could we start to think about altering this. So a couple things you're already doing that I really like are how much color variation you have going on. So in the sky, you have like quite a bit of color variation, which is really awesome and makes that area feel so alive, even though you've compressed your value ranges. That is all excellent. It takes a lot of people a lot of time to learn that. And I don't know how long you've been painting, but at any level, I think it's a very cool skill to be leveraging. I think it could be going on more in these trees, and compared to the love you put in the sky, I'd say the trees feel a little slapdash, these like scribbly tops. And sometimes that just comes down to they're not compressed enough. Like if you take anything and you compress it far enough, the rendering is excellent. So I want to take a look at that. If we just start to compress these, I will probably be a little more into them. And then I'm also gonna, here I've darkened this, so that makes the read a lot more graphic. Like right now we've got this diagonal across here, but we're not like feeling that diagonal the same way that we could. And this piece seems to me to be all about sort of graphic power. So, you know, if you look especially at the thumbnail, just going dark there and committing to that separation, is it black or is it white? going to give us a ton more impact. And because of the way you've drawn this and the amount of color variegation back here, we're not going to sacrifice depth, especially if we control it with edge as well. I like lighter and darker color layers because they let me do things like this, where I can just start to sneak behind other, colors without intruding on ranges I don't want to affect. So I'm going to mess around with that here and just drop this cloud behind, just because, we want to exaggerate contrast where we want to look and minimize it where we don't want to look. And this is kind of a bizarre spot. It doesn't bother me at all in the lighter contrast. So I think your choice there is fine. But once we increase the contrast, this spot gets a little edgy. There's like a lot of little subtle back and forth of dark to light right there. So I just want to tone that down. And if you'll look for me right here at just the face as I toggle this on and off, it really does change the feeling. It like blocks off that avenue. You'll hear about people talking about like escape, and you don't want there to be like avenues out of the piece. I don't really believe in any of that stuff, but I do want to minimize contrast as I move away from focal points. I think that's a great rule. Same thing right here. There's just like a little bit of that going on. And I think just carrying through, continuing, making it feel like all these shapes are strong and solid and they shoot out of the piece, that this is just a glimpse of like a broader world that goes on and on and on, could be really useful. So I'm going to just solid up some of these sort of in-betweeny value choices now that I've taken the piece in a more graphic direction. And again, this is just a possibility. Since you're in the chat, you can say if it's like, whoa, no, that's not what I would want it to be at all. But at the same time, I try to just play off of what I think.
I think that really helps. I think it's interesting too, the fact that you made it darker and it's in the distance shows that like atmospheric perspective is not about making things lighter all the time as it recedes. It's about reducing contrast. And you get two things here. Like, I think making it darker does kind of reduce that contrast. And you brought those two shapes together of like the light and the shadow on those trees. And the fact that it merges in with the shadow of the leg on the horse. It's like, if you're really looking at this scene, I think there wouldn't be quite as much contrast there. And it feels a lot more natural and like increases the feeling of depth, even though you happen to make something darker in the distance. So I think that's like a good example of that kind of rule that is not that helpful, of like things always get lighter in the distance as it being working against the piece in this example.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also want to say about that it's kind of like that earlier with the spaceship where I like just lighted the whole ground and that made the ship feel totally different. That your separation in two values is the master. Like if you think of making a piece of art from the point of view I talked about earlier, where you're like hacking the human eye and brain, the master hack is the two value comp. If the two value comp feels sharp and pokey, the piece will feel dangerous. If the two value comp feels flat and stable, the piece will feel calm almost no matter what you draw in it. I've seen battle scenes that feel so calm because there's all these big value groupings and it's just like a horizontal line basically. So you got to watch out for that kind of stuff, and it always makes more of a difference.
Yeah, you can solve everything or 90% of things in two values. I mean, like if you have more kind of jagged shapes with more activity, you'll be able to notice things that maybe counteract that also. Like if you have the right kind of shape design, but everything is kind of accidentally evenly spaced, it's going to kind of kill any kind of motion. But if you have like these big contrasts between huge shapes and tiny shapes, plus that kind of shape language, well, it's going to kind of reinforce everything. And if you only have a few groups to work with, two groups, and you can see all the shapes and everything that's happening, you can really kind of get to the core of the important decisions in a painting. And I'm on my second week of telling my students in the value class to stay in just two values. And who knows, I might even go longer with it, just staying in two values.
You literally can't go too far with this. Like, I just want to say this because I think people tend to think that as they get further along, they'll focus on more and more. And we've talked about that. No, hopefully they'll focus on less and less, but that carries into like your training regimens and things like that too. Like I don't study, I study some stuff that might seem like kind of esoteric, but in general, if I need to practice, if I need to like sharpen up, I'm studying the fundamentals, not something else shallowly and broadly, but these basic fundamentals that make me the artist I am deeper and deeper and deeper, and learning more and more what they can do. I do want to get back to talking about this one just for a sec. I notice once I made this change, and I know this was a voluntary change that's leading to a lot of other things, but I'm just looking at it like, what if I made this? There was kind of like a weird moment here where the tail swept off and could potentially be a little bit confused with the ground. I don't really feel that happens, but there's two things going on there. One is that the value is so close to the sky up here. So I thought we can really like commit to that and get the tail catching light much brighter to pop it forward. And also we can just change its position so that we see this color here and move through. The eye is all about relationships. So we want to be able to relate this patch to this patch over here. And you've kind of denied us that throughput that gives us the clarity with the tail position. So that was something I kind of jumped on. And I used that to start making other changes in the flanks here. Like you'll notice this color right here, I've gone a lot more saturated. This is something that you're already doing really well, is you're varying your color, but I want that variation to come with even deeper intent. So like when you get brighter, I want you to choose in the piece, does brighter mean more saturated or less saturated? That should be related to the choice of the color of your lighting. But with this outdoor sort of like sunlit lighting, I'm feeling like it's going to get warmer. And so I want to like just heat up that leather. The value doesn't need to change at all, but you can just saturate it more and get that deeper richness by moving into purer whites. You've got this meta sort of composition that I drew out earlier, this kind of stuff. But then also there's little sub rules inside of that can be really helpful. Like in general, I'll try to push light and dark more and more the closer I get to camera, because I'm trying to accentuate form usually of items that are closer. So I'm going to go darker in the horse's leg, maybe. I actually hate that, so I'm not going to keep that. But I would at least want to experiment with it, and potentially it could be done everywhere. But because it's a white horse, I actually really like what you've done here. And yeah, these hooves I might want to do something with. I don't know if I would just draw them or something. I'm not sure. I don't know that the composition like super supports them. If it was like a ongoing project, I might have scaled everything down a little just to make room. Potentially. It's tricky though. I mean, your composition here is really nice. I want to double down on saying that. So, those are the kinds of things that at the comp stage before you got to here, I would have been, if I was kind of like looking at this along the way, might have been asking for there to be a little more thought on. And with the light coming in here and here, all this coming from the same direction is really nice. I feel that there could be a more devoted, maybe like pool of shadow down here. I don't know if this is going to work because having lighter contrast on the ground is really nice and is doing a lot of things for your composition. But let's just imagine for a sec that the horse doesn't have hooves and it really just does end in these like sticks. And then we, boom, we could get just a little more feeling of groundedness that way. And this kind of information can feel difficult to add if you don't have like a really tight understanding of light. So it's one of the reasons I really like light. Is one of, from my point of view, the three fundamentals, which are it's light, composition, and drawing. And if I have a problem with anything, it almost always turns out to be one of those. Everything else can be solved by like little stuff. But yeah, I would like something like that. I'm not going to take the time to like project out the shape perfectly. Probably would even go this way more because this leg's kicking back, but I would want you to think about that kind of stuff. And what I said about lights and darks, you could continue to go more light and dark right at your separation points, and then yeah, like fan out here into the light. It's nice. And that kind of commitment to light and shadow is like a small thing that you can exaggerate the light and shadow somewhere. And if you do that here, you can do it here, and you can do it here, and you can do it here. And what you can kind of start to get is like, and I noticed this a lot when I started looking at like Ruan Gia's work and Piotr Jablonski and a few others, that like they really just push their lights and shadows to these utter extremes. And they do it everywhere. So it feels consistent, but the pieces just feel so much punchier. Every shape stands off every other shape and has this really strong justified feeling. And then when they go and do something like this, the subtlety, we literally are getting the contrast of subtlety to like utter conviction as just another contrast we can take advantage of. I'm going to go ahead and move on from this one because I think all those little things could keep going on through the piece. Whenever I'm seeing something like back here, these brush marks, you know, some are like kind of big in ways that are drawing me back. A lot of times with clouds, I mean, I really will just get like a little, this is just like a little duster brush, and I'll just kind of do some hand drawing on these edges. If you are a big Pieter fan, he has a video on Gumroad still of like him painting these. It's like a kid looking at his cat in a tree. You'll notice that he like hand paints almost everything together like this, just by kind of letting the hand like chaos over these areas. Once they're masked in, you can get a much higher feeling of informational fidelity with just these little marks. Like if I just look at just this area right here now, I flick that on and off, we can get a much greater feeling. And when you look in, it might not seem like a big difference, but when you're at a distance, you kind of do want to break up some of those big, super obvious edges in a painting like this, where you've gone so crystal clear on just like everything. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Some people are like, oh, I know I have to have lost edges. No, you just need a cohesive structure to your thought. The last thing I wanted to say earlier was that if I had done this darkening, you could pretty easily do something where you change the color a lot and then start to drag an eraser through here. That eraser is no good though. And just start to introduce a little more color variation back here, because I think you have such nice color variation in your sky. And so seeing that in your ground plane and in your trees could be really, really awesome. And then if you do go for big lost edges, I would say the same as you're doing with your values, where it's like really strong commitment to them. You could, like, if you wanted to like lose some stuff, big commitments, and it's digital, so you can go crazy. I mean,
I love that. It really brings it together.
all right, I think that's good on this, unless Neil has any other like specific questions.
Yeah, do you have any questions? Doesn't seem like it. It seems like we're good. I think that the advice seems like it could apply to most of these.
Yeah, to a lot of the more advanced ones, I'm looking at, like, you know, that kind of subtle handling and stuff. But like in here, I mean, this one's awesome. I wouldn't like have anything for this, you know. I really like how the horses are handled, softness of their edges, you know, the strength of the values. This is also like subtle through here, but kind of groups with the darks without competing. I mean, this is just awesome. Like if somebody brought this to me at the goat farm and said like, hey, you know, do you think this is good to go? I'd be like, yes, just leave me alone and send it to the client. It's awesome. You know, you could choose to go further with certain things, like if you wanted, but this is all, and we talked about having like a holistic frame of mind or a framework that ties the whole piece together. This is a great example in your portfolio of a united framework of everything being handled in a nice way that's similar, you know, like the softness and then the medium edges here. It all just feels really well controlled. All right, yeah, let's jump to something else. I know I've been moving a little slower here, but I think it's important to be thorough. Let's jump into this one. This might not take that long, but I think it's an interesting discussion to have. My name is Jose Vasquez. I'm submitting my artwork for the Underpaint workshop crit. I've been struggling lately to figure out where I should take my work and how to make it better. I appreciate this opportunity a lot. Thanks so much. Well, first of all, you paint really nicely. So there is that. But I do feel that this artwork is really inspired by one particular artist. So my gut instinct with answering this question would be to ask you what you're wanting to paint. I mean, if you want to paint in the exact same style and the same subject matter as that artist, a lot of what people see when they look at your art is going to be like, oh, it looks just like so-and-so, which can be a really unfortunate thing because you're painting excellently and this is really well handled. So that would be a hard response to get all the time. And it's also going to be harder to carve out a business niche if someone else competes in that space. So for you, I think you're at a place that, you know, you might want to start exploring what kind of imagery turns you on that isn't this artist. There's a couple of ways I'll have people do that. You know, some people don't have a crazy broad exposure to different artists. Some people do. One of the exercises I really like is making a goal folder, which is basically like you set a limit for a number of images, like let's say like 20 images. And then you, let me see if I can find mine real quick. You basically drag like all the art you really like in there, but it can't just be art you like. It has to be art you wish you had made. Training. So art that's like good and in the direction you're trying to go, not just anything. And then you cut down until you hit that number. So right now mine's kind of ballooned up. It's rather large. This is like 50 images. And some of them are my own where I'm using this as a way to drag images in and look at them. You know, we talked about looking at the gestalt of pictures more than their specifics. I'm looking at this in thumbnail compared to everything else in the folder. I'm not even looking at it. I'm just looking at the folder in general. And if I've dragged a piece in here that's not good or not up to the level of what I'm trying to achieve, it'll stick out like a sore thumb. This one I actually think fits in here nicely, and it's got all these different spotted local blacks that are really fun and make the characters literally feel like they're tumbling head over foot because the values are tumbling. So there's that. You basically can just, and then like once you get, I would encourage you to go to a really low limit, like go down to like 20 images. And if you find it difficult, you'll learn a lot more. But you can also do this with just pictures. Like I have a folder on my desktop that some of you may have just seen called Cool Shit. And whenever I'm like searching for reference for an illustration and I find something I like that doesn't have anything to do with the assignment, or even if it does, I'll save it there. And then at the end of the every assignment, I drag out everything from the ref folder into there that I like, and just see what kind of stuff you respond to that's not this artist. And then maybe use your really awesome painting skills to paint some of those things from reference at first, or paint stuff from imagination that's similar to those things. Because yeah, I mean, all this is nuts, dude. You could really do a lot with this. And you've got already, like, you know, it's a very monolithic structure, but just want to point out anyway, as I keep beating on this like idea of two values, which I usually refer to by the word pattern. This two value comp, there's a divot. You know, we've got this, and then this big shape is interrupted by these little small shapes up here. And the head kind of like conks off into a middle value, which lets there be more focus on this set of hands. You know, if you really wanted to go forward with this exact kind of work, I would just try to find other ways to differentiate. But I don't think that addressing the technical here is super relevant, just because that's kind of like on lock. Devin, what do you think? Anything else on this one?
I agree with what you said. I think that this feels kind of like mentally zoomed into me on the details, when I think a little bit more thinking in the early stages about that big two value pattern that you mentioned would make a lot of the details that you can paint have a lot of more impact.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, because obviously you can do that. So now everything that you're doing is a matter of choice.
Basically. Yeah, it's just sitting on like a structure that isn't saying something super interesting when all the details are really interesting. So
yeah, this kind of becomes like a piece that's about showcase versus like conveying something else in addition to that showcase. You know, you could just do something quite simple like this and group the bottom down to get more and more impactfulness here. But yeah,
I would really recommend like a 2-value limited exercise for this artist, because I think that's going to reveal, like, it's going to be really tempting to add in details and you'll find that you can't. So like, what are the other things that you can do? And you're going to be able to practice those things at that point.
Yeah, totally. And this 2-value exercise, like for anyone who hasn't seen any of the other content that Devin or I produce, like I'll just give an example of this real quick. Like no opacity. Wow, stop doing that. Okay, there we go. No opacity, no complication, just 2 values, hard edges. And I think there's stuff like what's going on with the cloak out here. There's a really big slow drift of value on the outsides, which would look more like this. But if you have to represent it in just like opaque hard edges, then it's kind of like this.
Exactly. It forces you to make decisions.
Yeah. And so these shapes are all kind of like similar-y. And in here, there's not a lot of huge variation either. I like that this is at least not symmetrical, and that there's, and this, like, by the way, like I was kind of saying like, oh, let's move on. And now we're critiquing it more. I don't want the artist to feel like, oh, you said it was good, and now you're kind of like going back on that. We're just like rezzing up your critique to another level where it's like, I think Devin made a good call that we shouldn't gloss over anything. Let's like kind of give the actual tools, not just a suggestion. And we hadn't done this yet and at this point, I'll start to like squint. There's actually some, not allowed to use that brush. It's actually like this path right here, I think actually groups into the lights, as does this reflection maybe. But it gets more soft down here because, yeah, there's a lot of this non-committal drift from one value to another, which I think is
that can be like, again, the over reliance on atmospheric perspective.
Yeah, and so those mountains could continue to like not exist from a value point of view, or they could exist from a value point of view, like if we wanted to represent them and then let their tops be white, could do that.
Right.
A lot of that comes down to, I think, again, great point, Devin, like what you're trying to say with the piece. Like, why is this down here? Is this character a bane of this town? Like, is it a dark shadow that haunts them? In that case, having this area back here be, let me finish this trace off real quick. Having the creature or whatever it is, like cast a shadow on the town, would be really interesting.
Because then you can have like the technique or like the principle of this 2-value pattern like fundamentally relate to the idea. Right now they're completely separate, and if you use like a shadow shape to convey something about the narrative or the story or the feeling about what's going on, then the abstract composition is reinforcing the idea, and that's always what you want to have happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can basically play the music with like different instruments that complement each other, just like in a band, instead of just letting them all sort of solo at the same time. It's a really good point. But this is how I would do a study like that. I think people try to like do it too tight, too precious, like just trace the thing. You can, like, this is 1,000 times more useful than master studies, in my opinion, for most students. And with this one, again, there's kind of like a drift down here. It's just getting darker as it gets towards us. But if we wanted, we could. We could backlight the figure and then have its shadow crush through here. And areas where the shadow hasn't yet hit, like this roof could be lit. And you get this feeling that the town is starting to fall into shadow wherever this creature, oops, I accidentally used gray there. Wherever this creature is. So maybe then you would choose more town out here. more interesting shapes. And I liked what Devin pointed out about varying the shapes.
Yeah, I definitely think painting like this and not being able to put in those small details everywhere, and especially like not zooming in so far, like zooming in right now, it's not gonna really do anything. So it's not like it removes that temptation.
Yeah, totally. And then you can get that nice sort of like alpine glow on these trees and stuff, and really use that ability to render whatever you want. And then I would actually, you know, keep the background sort of as light as possible, probably. This is where like my temptation right now is to do what I've been doing in the paint overs and do this, but like I have to actually make a firm commitment. You know, does this stuff back here exist? Well, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, what does it look like if it doesn't exist?
Yeah, you can make it, it's like there's not a lot of commitment to these massive changes that affect the image so much. So you can actually like explore what is the best tool for the job here with whatever the idea is.
Yeah. I think I like having the mountains, but keeping them kind of small and letting there be like this big contrast between like town's shapes are small and the creature's shapes are massive. And then we're going to get this bouncing interest of like little highly gyrating shapes against like this big shape with one interruption in it. And then maybe some of the shadows could come higher. I mean, if we really want this creature to be like looming over the world, we could actually go and a little bit of connection might be nice, like even if it gets really barely touches. And then we could actually not represent any of this and flip this so the white head is shown. The spikes are dark on dark.
Yeah, you can think about big relationships. Like, is it light on dark? Is it dark on light? Or is there no contrast? Is it light on light or dark on dark? That's the kind of stuff that isn't going to read with like these massive gradients of value.
Yeah, and gradients have a place. Like I do want to say that like the contrast of one small gradient in a concept against these bigger changes can be like really potent, but it should definitely not be relied upon in that way.
And they generally just like reinforce these big compositional decisions. I think like Piotr's a good example of this because his work uses a lot of gradients, and it might seem like at first there's these huge ranges of value, but they are just transitions between these really confident decisions that are being made right here.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. Yeah, they like go, they're not the steak, they're the sauce.
Exactly, yeah.
So I might decide to like top light this guy a little, or have, you know, a concept like that to really just vanish him in here and have him kind of like coming out of the dark. And then I might use this to encourage myself to like paint the hand, like actually catching a brighter set of lights so that the hand itself reads in two values, not just the lights. I think that could be kind of cool. I don't know. There's lots to mess around with here, and I don't suggest this as a solution, but I did want to just go through, how I would go about exploring a piece in two values.
Yeah, I think this principle is the like, it's the way to kind of reveal what wasn't working rather than it being the exact solution.
Yeah. Yeah, and eventually a lot of people who work this way get to a point where when it, like, I'll just say that for myself recently, I've started to feel that when I'm working like this, I'm seeing like this, and that's quite powerful because it gives you like a big set of bumper rails, but also a high position of leverage.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing in my value class too. It's like we're doing a lot of the two value stuff, and then paint from life or paint from imagination full value and full color, and try and see the same things that are happening in the two values.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have some, I don't really know if I can get to the sketches that would show this stuff off without showing a bunch of NDA stuff, but I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, this was a piece that just recently came out, so I can show all this stuff. I did a 10th anniversary edition, like the second book in the Name of the Wind series for Italy, and they wanted it to be Felurian on the cover for some reason, which was a really bizarre ask. But like when I was trying to figure out how to make that work, I was obsessed with this principle. And as I still am. And so when I'm sketching, I'm just sketching everything in 2 values. Like she's dark on dark and is only really revealed by the gaps in her that kind of like show these moths floating through. This piece, which is the sketch that eventually went into final, her body groups in sort of ambiguously with the lights in the background. So there's an utter flattening there, but it's all at twilight. So we can kind of get away with that. And then I'm just looking at the big shape harmonies of this. If you squint at this, especially, you can see this light blooms into light against dark. This one's more obscured as we move back into shadow, and it's actually dark on dark if I had to represent it. And I think I pushed that relationship even darker in the final. And then out here, I've got these little thin shapes contrasting this massive shape over here that is really quite ambiguous in its edges. So it's like, you can think about it like music. And Devin, I know you come out of music, so you probably think about it.
It's the same thing, same exact thing.
You're just like,
contrast and harmony.
Boom, bing, bing.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is just an example of how I would, mess around with stuff like that in sketching, and I'm seeing it in black and white as I move, which gives me a lot of freedom because it's like almost anything can work as long as those big groupings.
Are these all variations for like sketches for the same? Like, can we see some of the other ideas that didn't make it?
Yeah, no, this is that. So like I didn't even send something like this. This got abandoned after like a few hours. This was the original concept that I was pretty into.
That's really cool.
Just basically, if you squint at this, it's like a brick of black, so to speak, and then just the flowers and her stomach bloom into light. And the stomach draws contrast because it's clearly not the shape of the flowers, and it's a really different shape than the flowers. So we get dragged back and we have to explore in this like black on black area what is going on back there. But a figure is something we're programmed to find. So it works pretty nicely.
We talked about this earlier, like the idea that the more you do this, the less you think about. I think this is a great example. Like here, I think what you're thinking about is just contrast. Like, what are different variables that I can show contrast about? And yeah, like I think that really leaves things open for focusing on what the idea needs, rather than having any kind of like process. So I think that's the overcomplication is thinking about too many things. And I think a really kind of really useful model to think about is just contrast in general.
Yeah, any kind of contrast. Like I remember I was taking a mentorship with Greg Manchus at one point. And he was like, everybody thinks I've got these smooth or these like chunky painty strokes, but like if you look at how I do my underpainting, it's designed to be as smooth as possible so that wherever that shows through, you not only get a depth contrast like visually, but also there's a textural contrast, and that's just baked into my process. And at the time I was just like, that was way beyond me at the time. I thought it was awesome though.
I think also like the value stuff that's going on in these is kind of the same thing that we looked at in Mila's painting of like darkening that background so it'll merge into the shadow of the horse's leg. And I would recommend just like for anybody, next time you're outside and looking at something very far away, notice how the values like can merge with things that are pretty close to you, that there isn't really that extreme fall off of value. So things that are far in the distance can be in the same kind of shape group as things that are right up close to you. And you can make really interesting compositional decisions instead of separating everything needlessly.
And that breaks down a lot of your like own arbitrary rules. Like most of the time when I'm struggling in a piece of art, it's because I'm following an arbiary rule that doesn't have to exist.
Yeah.
So any way to break that stuff up. But this is just what I sent to the client. Was these, and then they were like, yes, but can you change everything about it and reveal her much more and change the concept? And I was like, yeah. So that was how we ended up here. I didn't even send these where there's like a taller stone behind her. I was really not digging this value arrangement. If you squint at this, it's just this like kind of cross that's interrupted by her in a way that wasn't like adding much. I didn't feel it was a lot of symbolic elements, but I was just starting to spend more and more time focusing on my 2 value reads at this point, and the intuition just wasn't in line with the execution. Something like this worked nicely in that vein, but I just felt like I'd painted something like this before and it wasn't it just wasn't going to be fun to paint. And that's important. You don't want to send sketches you don't want to paint.
This is cool to see. And I think also another lesson I'm seeing in these is that like at thumbnail size, these look really similar to the final one. And that means like your sketches should relate to your final painting. You should be solving problems that like carry through to the finish instead of it being like entirely different at the end. So you might as well solve these problems when things are simple instead of when you have all this extra drawing and color and value information to deal with.
Yeah, especially at first. I'm a big fan of pushing performers to like make intuitive leaps. So eventually, and one of the things I like with working with people at the Go Farm is like most of those people are working professionals at this point. So like a lot of the times I'm actually giving them the opposite advice of what you're talking about. There's like a nice curve where as we start to get better and better at art, we want to like control the art more and more. And that's what process gives us. And then at a certain point, it's like, you got to start surrendering control to actually have a better performance. And so yeah, that advice I would say for each person listening, depending on where you are, you need that advice more or less. Some artists cling to control for too long and they don't leap off the cliff, so they're never going to fly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let's see how many more of these we can get through. We've been moving kind of slow, but we're tackling big principles that I think.
I think we don't have to get through too many more. I know we'll probably go for like 20 more minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just bust through a couple of these and relate them back so that
because I think we did, like we talked about in the beginning, how it's always kind of the same things you come back to, and I think we did get through a lot of these big principles.
Yeah, here, so like this one lends itself really nicely to black and white analysis. But you don't have to convert it all the way into black and white to make these changes. I think usually when there's a lot of light sources like this, it's easy for things to compete. Like right now, these thunderbolt shapes can be like confusing my mind a little because, you know, their shape arrangement is very similar to the lightning, like flowing all through the piece. So maybe the chest, because it's so iconic, I would let bloom into light. But the rest of this, from a black and white point of view, I'm actually going to shove down into the dark and let the lightning be the star of the piece and carry all the values together through. And then, yeah, just have little like touches of the light, like very subtle, wherever I think that they'd be sort of justified if I need them for interest, or if the lightning feels like it's coming really close. And then that way you're getting more impact out of the eyes, the lightning bolt. And you can let some of this stuff get quite lost. And the piece is really going to sing. I mean, this is cool. And I think when you simplify down like this, what you gain is the ability to focus on how you're arranging your shapes more. So like with these lightning shapes, they're all kind of equidistant. They kind of all equally splinter out. But what if we did like something where we control this path a little more and give it more variety? Just using the clone stamp tool here to like kind of preserve some of the informationality, but really small marks grouping together optically into like one bigger section. Just looking for another kind of contrast. And then I might want to see this side of him a little more now that I've grouped into the dark. So might carry this big bolt through and then have it do something interesting. Like a lot of these are coming down in this way. So maybe if I arc back, and then I'm now able to use this to like identify him selectively, popping out this arm, but keeping the other arm more in shadow and letting it be shown by rim light, so that we're not only having more contrast in the bolt, but in the way in which the character is revealed. You can maximize a lot of contrasts in here with that. And then if you wanted, you know, where there's like rain passing through, you could even have those sort of catch a little light if you wanted. And do more. These are a little samey to me now, so I'd probably keep messing with them. Since we have 20 minutes, I'm not going to like take it to its utter conclusion, but I think from everything we've talked about here today, and like the last one we did where we broke it all completely down into black and white, you can see how I'm thinking, and paint your own version of this, because that's gonna, I like when the thoughts come out of the artist, that, you know, the solutions should come from the artist that sort of like generated the thing, I think. And that's always going to be better when you try to fight someone else's fight, or the way they fight, you kind of like have lost already. It sounds like we're saying like, oh, everything's the same, it's just these two values and you need to think about this, but like, I don't know, it's kind of like saying like, oh, everyone's human, so they're the same. Like there's a million things you could do with this. And one really cool exercise for like anyone who's not sold on this principle yet is go and take like a couple pieces from like each artist you really like, artists that you feel are really different, and do these pattern studies in just black and white of their work. And then if you look at those pieces from 20 paces as value studies, you'll know exactly who did each one. And not just because you did the studies, but because the way each artist uses black and white, these fundamental separations, is basically the essence of them. Like all of Donato's pieces feel a certain kind of way when they're represented in black and white like this. All my pieces feel a certain kind of way. Devin's pieces are like that as well. And it's one of the things I've always really liked about his work. So don't feel that this simplicity is going to limit your individuality, because it's the exact opposite. It's
yeah, the simpler the tool, the more your individuality shows through.
Yeah, totally.
Also, like obviously a finished painting is going to have more than just two value groups, but the thought process that goes into them is exactly the same as those first two values. So you're still practicing everything with that.
Yeah, and one thing I want to show with that real quick, so like this is just a basic value scale. Say like we're making a piece, we're cranking along, we've separated it into two, but you don't just separate in half, right? Like this is what we were talking about earlier. If you're painting in the shadows, maybe you give yourself, you know, something like this as your darks. All your darks, this is here. But do you have these four values for your lights? No, you absolutely don't. You need a gap between, yeah, or else things are not going to feel separate, because in your darkest highlights, they're just going to bleed right over. So this separation is about declaring, where is my gap? And I think the broader the gap, usually, I don't want to speak in absolutes because it's like music where any rule could be broken, and that might be the power of it. But in general, the broader the gap and the more values are conserved, the more powerful the piece is going to be. Yeah. So this is your conceptual black. This is conceptual white, but in the actual piece, you might separate your whites into these two slightly different ranges. And then with your darks, you would have all this. What were you going to say there, Devin?
That's just a great way to show it. Yeah, I think like in reality, sunlight has like a certain distance away from the shadows that it makes, like given a certain environment. And I think, you know, again, like I'm spending kind of 8 weeks on that one principle that Tommy just showed. The simplest way that I can like break this down into the principle that like kind of becomes a rule, because it's based on like the way that light works and the way that we compress information, is that the more information that you put into a group, the further apart the other groups need to get. So you talked about like how far away does that need to be? If you're overstating information, the further apart they have to get, and probably the more clipping is going to happen. So that the flatter the shapes become, the more graphic. If you want to have more information, you reduce the contrast, you get a less graphic image that looks more like just gray when you zoom out. You can get more information inside both the sunlight and the shadow. So it's a wide range of what you can do, and it's not binary, and there's a ton of creativity in how you can navigate that budget of that value scale.
Yeah, like if we look at, I mean, I'm a big fan of showing Tomer Hanuka's work for making an example of this, is like the entire background is like a riot of different colors, and that's all in his conceptual whites. Because blacks are just these staunch locals, and so he separated the piece into a flat tone, and then everything else, as long as he leaves a little bit of a gap around black, could work. He could have gone a lot darker with this, and it still would have worked in the background. It's just so abstracted, but it totally works.
It's the same relative relationships we've been talking about.
Yeah, just used differently. And like I said, he's not holding himself to all the constraints of a realist. And so for those of you, and for anyone who watches later who's making non-realist work, you actually have an even broader range of things you can express using this two-value principle. I wanted to get to a few others, but I'm just gonna like screen them real quick to see what proving usage of hard and soft edges, especially as it relates to different materials. So this is cool in that it relates to some of what we've talked about. Also, what's up, Finchy? I don't think the materials are really differentiated by the edges that much. Like, yeah, that happens some, like if you're painting silk, you tend to get like bigger soft edges, but in general, different materials reflect light a lot differently. So that's maybe where I would start to send your focus. Like if this is like a vinyl dress for some awful reason, not saying that it is, but you know, it would start to get all these really light and dark highlights and shadows, and that's kind of separate from its edges. Like the edges will be a part of that, but you know, when you look at like leather, like black leather, like in the Matrix, you get this kind of thing where there's like a really subtle area that's in low light. And then that can sort of like erupt into a really bright highlight where the material is more reflective. But it doesn't reflect a lot of light in other areas. Whereas like if this was fabric, and I'm gonna, even though we only have about 5 minutes, try to slow down. Whatever we get to, I want to do thorough and not rush. It is a real, you know, I'm sure you run into this with classes, Devin, but I feel like the last 20 minutes of every session of the goat farm is kind of like I'm rushing because there was more I wanted to get to, and then like the topics don't come out as nice.
Yeah, there's always more to talk about.
Yeah. So let me just make sure, because you know, like I said in that crit for Mila, like the clarity, brain relates everything, and so have to approach with clarity. But now we've made this into something that, you know, even at a distance, we can tell like this is a different material now. Oh, I painted on the layer. You know what we'll do? There. This before, this is after. So this is a different material, and it's not super much about the edges. And we can get more specific with some information right here. I don't know why a dress would look this way, or a shirt or anything. And then there's not actually a lot of space right here, so we don't need this big shadow around it. Now, if it's like a dress that actually has some like physical component to it, like a built-in or something like that, then yeah, we might get this. Thinking always about what's actually been, you know, how everything touches and interacts in three-dimensional space. I used to not mess around with that too much, and now it's like my, you know, like I really regretted that. I just didn't know how to think that way. I didn't know how to like draw while thinking about 3 dimensions at the same time, weird as that might sound, because I didn't really grow up drawing, and I didn't have like an intuition for it. So kind of had to learn everything as like, you know, I don't know if I would say the hard way, but it feels like I learned everything really late. But with your edges, you've got a lot of really nice edge work in here. I think you could just reduce contrast, especially with and this comes down some to like conventional beauty standards, but you notice that a lot of really nicely painted faces throughout history have almost no contrast. There's something to it. So I think your edge handling is good, and that you don't want to push too much more, because edges tend to live, like most edges that you'll ever paint are medium, which is why I paint almost everything with this brush or something like this brush. So this is a soft medium edge, and this is a sharp medium edge. And I'll control the actual sharpness by how small I go. Now that seems a lot sharper. And then if I need to go soft, I go all the way soft. And if I need to go sharp, I go all the way sharp. And the only other type of brush I really use a lot is this one, which has one of each, you know, depending on which side I'm on. I can like clean up an edge like this and get a drift out here. I don't want to mess with your edges right there though, because now I've changed the position of her shoulder. But by lowering contrast, I know it really does seem weird, Devin, like everything tends to come back to this stuff, but by lowering contrast, you're actually pushing the values closer together, which makes the expressivity of each edge, especially where those edges relate to value changes, seem greater. And then when you want to make a big expressive statement, you have room for that now. You can, like if we're in this, all this, and I'm just gonna like tighten up the values down here and not worry about the head, because that area is going to take too much time for what we have right now. But everything below like this point is now kind of in like a nice minimal key. And I'm going to go ahead and do this as well. Then, you know, if we want to like lose an edge into the background completely, we can.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, notice how much more sculptural this makes it look, and there's less value doing that. So like to make something look like it has volume, you don't need to work that hard at it. You just need to have them in the right place, basically, the contrast in the right place.
Yeah, and I think your contrasts are in the right place. You know, you've got either some reference or some nice informational lighting ability that you're using here and getting things down. So I would say stick with that. And when you want to keep going further, police these contrasts, and you'll be able to get, you know, when two edges or when two values are closer together, look how much easier it is to blend their edges and get them to feel soft. We can get really, really soft changes that way. Devin, we're right at 8. I'm down to go just a little further, but I don't want to
that's good. Yeah, that's good.
So you let me know what you think.
Do you want to finish this one up?
I think this is good for now. I mean, based on you know, the artist's requests, like I think this covers the materials, which is more about lighting key, how the material reflects, and then edges, which is about, you know, just controlling contrast in such a way that you set yourself up for those edge differentiations. So I don't want to go too much further on this one. Also,
sorry, go on.
No, nothing. I was going to say it's just in a style where like how the artist uses those things will not be like how I'm using them. And I want to leave more room for them to develop it on their own.
Do you want to get to one more example? A different artist?
Yeah, totally. All right. I am sorry that we didn't get to everybody. It's so difficult to get to everything. And that is one of the reasons that I just work with like a small private group every week now, because the kind of depth that's required and the amount of feedback that's required, it's not like you need a ton of feedback, but you need a little bit of feedback on every piece, you know, like as you go. I think this one's an interesting example. Oh, there's a few people that I'm just going to say, you're good. This is really solid, Consta. Like, I like the handling. You said you want to improve anything that sticks out. There's not a lot that sticks out here to me for like immediate analysis. I really like the softness back here. I do think this light value could carry through. We've talked about that a lot tonight. You could do that by taking some of this light value and putting it on the ship, actually lighting the top of it a little. And so you'd have this contrast of this big soft shape on the right, transitioning into medium transitions in the middle, and then this one bright pointed light in the background. You'd actually get more depth out of the situation by shoving light into your middle ground, which again, like Devin keeps pointing out, is kind of counterintuitive if you think of everything as having to scale back, but I think it would look really nice. And I really love how you've handled this ship, and this ship has some edges that are a little noisy, so it could be controlled a little more, I guess, but I mean, this is awesome. There's not a lot that like sticks out. I think using a little bit of the two value stuff we've talked about tonight could take it even further.
The design of the clothes and the staff looks really, really cool. I feel like the two value compositional stuff is going to like showcase that really great design even better.
Yeah, this is really, really cool. It's very far along. So even though you struggled with the composition and lighting, I do want to say that struggle is where the gain is. You know, if you struggled with a piece and then people tell you it went well, because normally what happens is when you struggle, it's like you're trying something beyond your means. And so you're actually kind of unqualified in the end to know if it went well or if it went poorly. But I think Devin and I both agree this is pretty solid. Really nice. So keep pushing in that direction. Staying like I remember somebody talking about this. Actually, this was like Sam Weber on his podcast back in the day was talking about how some artists change their style instead of having a style. And I always think about people like David Bowie, where it's like at every time they made music, they were current. And yeah, you just kind of learn that like outside my comfort zone is my comfort zone as an artist. That's where I want to live. And if I could encourage everybody to one thing, I think that's a really good principle.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like changing style for the sake of it. It was following a new artistic impulse, and that's where that style came out of, almost as like a secondary, as an emergent property of that.
Yeah, like I work on all kinds of stuff that like necessarily hasn't seen the light of day, but that's different styles. Like if I see somebody's style and I can't figure out how it's done, I basically get obsessed with that and try to like, especially if it's style I like. So there's artists I've studied their work like a ton in the background, just trying to crack the code on like what makes it feel this way. This piece is another one I thought we could easily drive home. One of the things we've been talking about a lot tonight, which is key. So the key here is just a little ambiguous, but everything's, you know, like coming along. I think the key could get a lot more dramatic really quickly, if that is what you want. If you just organize everything into being a solid brick and lose some of your contrasts, like things like, it seems like this is meant to be blood. And reds especially don't show a lot of contrast between light and shadow. Well, I don't want to talk about reds generally, but yeah, I feel like red lives in a pretty narrow value range. So something that has local red will tend to not jump because then it becomes pink.
Yeah, like the more white light you throw on red, it just gets more saturated red.
Yeah, exactly. So you can keep this all down and then
I'm curious about this idea. Can you say in the chat, like if this was from a story? Because it's really, it's kind of making me want to learn more about what's going on here.
which is a great thing for a piece of art to do. Are they saying?
I think they're typing. But
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I think if this is like, this is your own idea, it's such a cool idea. So you're saying it's meant to put the viewer as his subject. Like, it seems like it's an original kind of story, which is awesome. And like, that's the best place to be, where you have this idea that you have a lot of faith in, and that's really working. And then you just need to make these like decisions with the tools we have available, like the painting tools, to say that idea that as clearly as we can. Sometimes that means stumbling at first and saying it and not so clearly, but then you can kind of revise that. So yeah, I think like this is a great place to be, because you have a really good reason for saying these things in the first place.
A lot of times when you have a piece like this, that's in like a 0 key, where it's like there's, you know, conceptually not a lot of not a lot of differentiation between things, and then you're portraying everything really low contrast. What's needed is just a point of reference. So you still need some kind of 2-value composition to get that feeling of contrast. So you could just have it so that like in the background, like there's glow, or this is catching light for some reason. I don't tend to like to add a lot of glow. So I like the idea that this is somehow or for some reason caught light, sort of a rather warm light, and then perhaps that's percolating somewhere else, like just the coat. I think it also functions if it's like just on the coat, but I want to like, I really would like to see it little more interesting in terms of how it's applied. So imagine that what I'm doing is actually like lightening all this and keeping the informationality. You could kind of have like these bolts of light up here that just turn the rest of the piece on. And then because you have that activating light, you could actually continue to further minimize everything and just let it be really dark on dark, because it is kind of eerie. I mean, I want to say obviously, but then I'm like, I mean, I hope that's what's intended, but yeah, it's coming across. And so, you know, you can just continue to reduce, and like a white coat in shadow can still get like so dark. Mead Schaefer's like awesome at doing that. If you want to look at some sort of old school work that has that sort of principle. So I'm going quite far with this here, but my point is that you can get a much more dramatic feeling and more loud in the red. I don't really like these last few marks. I would probably go a little softer than this here in the coat. I overshot it, but it could definitely be done. And
I think it would be worth doing that on like the hands on the camera too a little bit. I think that's like, feels like the contrast of the hands and the camera and the bracelet feel a little bit artificially overstated. Whereas the face looks really good.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it looks like there's maybe like red gloves, or maybe the hands are, I think this is the sampling dots. That's cool. Yeah, same thing with this kind of stuff. Just like Devin said, you can knock all this down and get more out of it actually as the eye comes in here and expands this range. Somebody whose work you might be really interested in for these kinds of compositions is Alexander Mandryjiev. I would take a look at some of his key art and just see how he's controlling two values to make a lot of really not that finished looking painting in the shadows sing and tell so much story. And he's a great one to look at for narrative in imagery too. I know that can be a weird one to Google, so let me just write his name real quick. Ooh. Mandryjiev.
I'd also recommend doing like the two value exercise. You could try with film stills also, with like movies with good cinematography, and try and figure out what is the scene trying to do, what is it saying, and how does that underlying two value composition support that idea? How is it conveying that visually?
Yeah, absolutely agree, because there's a whole realm of people whose job it is to make that happen in movies. And so movies are like this pre-selected type of reality when they're done well, same way that we want painting to be.
And I think, like you said, like the kind of golden age illustrators who were working from a narrative, Cornwell, Mead Schaefer, like that would be good to study also, because it's a very similar thing going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like a lot of these are now covered by some of the stuff we have talked about. This work, Dan, is awesome. I'm a really big fan of this one. I think if you were to like do studies of your own pieces, you might find that this one has a somewhat more chaotic two value composition that's hiding a lot of what you've handled here and how well it's handled. Whereas in this, there is, a lot of the shapes are about the same size, like this pool of light, this pool of hair, this pool of hair is a little smaller, but you can have much bigger, more dramatic separations and let that separations of size. I mean, you've got a really nice separation of light and dark here. You could push it in some areas, but I think a lot of what we've talked about tonight will help with that. I also want to do one thing on this one, which is, this is a kind of rendering that I see a lot in the computer that people it's like a type of painting that relies on accumulation. So like you've got a round brush and you're working, and like say we want to add some stuff right here, and we get these kind of like overlappy little bits. I see like these kind of marks through here, where the round brush is like changing it's just changing its opacity a lot in a way that leads to this sort of scattered look. And I think to some degree this has been romanticized because of like studies that you see from people where that's done, but study doesn't have the same onus on it or the same potential of control that a final does. So the one thing I noticed in these pieces that I would, if I was working with you more like one-on-one, that I would want to do is you might be able to take your, this will feel really weird at first, but if you look at your Wacom sensitivity and customize the feel so that like what I've done is make it so that if I push even like 20 or 30% hard, it just like ramps up.
Yeah. I remember the first time that I did this, and it was early on. Someone gave this advice, and it was probably one of the most difficult and most it had the biggest payoff of like anything that I've done for learning art. It's changing that pressure sensitivity.
Awesome. Yeah, good to hear, because I feel the exact same way. So I'm glad to have someone else. I haven't really talked about this with anybody else, so it's good to hear. That, well, I mean, like anybody else that like had to learn it. Me and you both kind of started later, so I feel like there was a lot that I learned just because someone told me. But I don't hear this talked about too much. And so, you know, I have to know which of my brushes is going to give me medium edges. You know, we showed this already, but I'd like to see you controlling the hardness and softness of your transitions a little more carefully so they don't build up that sort of like chippy choppy look, unless, you know, you want to make that like an absolute hallmark of your work. And if you do that, and I won't even say it's necessarily a bad idea. We've talked about him a lot tonight, but Pieter goes through and will just draw every little thing, like with these chicky-chacky sort of marks that he's like building up this grit texture through the whole piece with just one brush, basically. But you just need to slow down and make sure that you control that. And also you need to change your colors quite often so that it doesn't look like you're transitioning one color to another only via varying opacity, because the computer does a lot of weird things with opacity. Like as you blend colors, they lose saturation. Even if both the colors were saturated that blend, they lose saturation. Whereas in paint, as you blend, you gain vibrancy because there's more actual pigment in the paint. So in the computer, it's really important to, like, the reason I have this Magic Picker plugin is because I would never do this. I would never change colors enough. But if I'm making these changes, I don't just want my transition from here to here to be about the fall off. I want to actually go in there and like pick the color that's going to happen in between. This is another thing that will take practice, just like the brush opacity thing, but your work's at a strong level. So if you can do that stuff and add this 2-value composition stuff we've talked about tonight in a more constant way, where that's always something you're using to police your work, I think it's really going to sing.
Yeah, as kind of an extreme way to also practice this, like you could try turning off pen pressure entirely for a piece, like try and get that to a finish without any pen pressure, and you're going to have to make stronger decisions. Yeah, did you have anything else for this one?
No, I'm trying to just hit each one with like basic commentary, but then also what I think the main thing I would have that artist focus on and harken back to stuff we have talked about. And I'm just going through to see if there's any that have information that like this. I really appreciated the comment on this one, by the way. I'm not going to zoom back in and check the names, but I read a lot of these in advance and I really appreciated what you said. And also I think in addition to focusing on just 2 values, which there's a lot of values in this piece, you can think of your lights as having a hierarchy. So a lot of times in fantasy work, what I'll tend to see is that like each light, well, it's like it's a light, so it's equally strong as an effect that's going on, but there has to be a big fall off in the hierarchy of lights to control them inside of a piece. So I might have suggested backlighting this character entirely, so like just dropping them almost entirely into silhouette and then reducing the brightness of these other things and letting this blue sphere really shine and then downplay the flames even. You're like the conductor, so you're saying, oh, louder, like I want more timpani, but you're actually saying like I want more of this effect that's in the painting, but other effect, shush, 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 like it's not your time right now, and you want to police that in each piece. Program will just tell you how bright program thinks they are, but using the 2-value method and then also looking at scaling your values inside of those ranges, having nice travel in the ranges can help make sure you have centralized focuses. This one, I thought it was interesting that you wanted a little more polish. I think the work is really nice. You know, you could push the lights and darks more extreme. Sometimes the overall relative relationship is right, but it's minimized. On the other hand, this, like for viz dev or something, like if this was just like a more obviously concept arted creature or something that was in development for Avatar, this would be a totally acceptable and also quite a good deliverable to turn in for work. Like I love the work in the waves, the handling, the fact that these stay dark enough as you go back that they still group with the darks. They could maybe do that a little more based on some of the other stuff we've talked about tonight, but I think this piece is a knockout. So just wanted to say that. I don't know if Devin, you want to jump in with anything else on this one?
The only thing that jumps out to me is I feel like the edges can be kind of random in this. I think it's mostly an edge thing where it's like you get a really, really sharp edge and then it gets really, really soft and then really sharp again. It's like if a song just like kept changing volume like all over the place instead of having like a constant volume for the verse and a constant volume for the chorus, which is identifiably louder. So I just watch out for like where edges, like in the noun ends in the back, like it gets some of the edges get really, really lost and then get really, really found again. So it's kind of, my eye is kind of pulling all over the place because of I think the edges can be more organized in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I could get on board with that, especially in the mountains where you called it out. I feel like in the sky, I'm actually pretty down with it.
I like the sky. I think it's in the mountains. I think in the foreground.
Yeah. Yeah, good call there. And a lot of times when we have like a lot of brush variety built into our workflow, that can happen because the brushes just carry their own sort of footprint. Some just have certain kinds of edges. But for anybody that's facing a problem like this, like I go through and organize my brushes by edges. So like there'll be, you know, if there's like a group type like airbrush, well, this is like a standard airbrush, but it can actually get softer than this, which is a grain airbrush. And so each section of type of brush is sorted by like the sharpest of that type to the softest of that type. And that can help like just make sure that you have, it can take a little while to like drill these in. And what I did when I was trying to drill these in is I would just every day, like I would just for my warm up, like I did at the beginning of this, I would just start a painting and I would only allow myself to use one row and I would have to remember what's the next brush in the row and then do a painting using only those brushes from the row and get familiar with the relative hardness and softness and see like, okay, if I'm in like my airbrush row, like I have to get really small to get sharp edges. And so you learn a lot about what each brush can do by limiting access to other rows of brushes. It probably seems like a lot also because right now I have a ton of brushes, but I'm in the middle of a reorg right now, actually doing this exact thing I'm talking about. So they're not all perfectly in order right now, but like this whole row, you can see that they're kind of similar and they just do like insane stuff. So going through and figuring out like the hardness and softness of these brushes is like kind of complicated to me, but I want to do it because I actually want more variety. But inside that variety, I want a governing subconscious harmony of like, I know where hard and soft belong. And thought, Devin, that was an awesome analogy about the music, that the volume's not just like changing all the time. All right. We're not going to get to all the rest, but we did do this one. I just want to quickly glance at them and see if any of these have an issue that I think was not at all repped. This is an interesting one. I think this like sends you even more in the direction of the value stuff we've talked about. I see this a lot with certain students, which is that the running out of patience. It's interesting that that's relating to over rendering for you, Gabriella, just because if you'll spend more time at the beginning on those big fundamentals, then you'll find at the end, you really don't have to paint very much to get something to feel nicely polished. Like the more the values have to travel and change and be nicely, you know, light to dark, this like shift right here, when it's more minimal in terms of how the composition is laid out, it can just be like one single brush stroke can drift you from dark to mid-tone and things like that. So if you do find that you're kind of impatient, I would say the place to like use your willpower is at the beginning of the piece and in the sketch to make sure that you develop something that has really good, clear decisions, and then you'll get a big payoff on that at the back end. There's something the Navy SEALs say that I love, which is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So what I've actually had certain students do that are more impatient is break a piece down. Like every day you can do a study, 1 hour, and I want you to paint something that's like very simple like this, where it's like a head on a background but there's no background basically. Even like the back of a head or a simple still life object can be even better for this because the face can present its own challenges. But basically you get like 30 minutes to paint major statement, big marks, get the lights and darks, get the colors right. And then you get 30 minutes to detail it. And if it changes a lot when you're zoomed out after between 30 minutes and an hour, you know that like you kind of missed something in the big statement. So it naturally gives you feedback without having to have a teacher around, and you can keep trying to get the big statement more and more correct. And you have a photo that you were working from, so you have something to compare against. If you pick photos with nice, clear value statements, it makes this even easier. And it can hopefully show you that by slowing down on that first 30 minutes and getting the statement just right, in the second 30 minutes, it'll feel like you're flying. Every little detail will give you a world of power because it'll be falling on top of the right foundation. Really cool work, by the way. I think that it's not far off from where you're hoping for it to be. All right, it feels really bad to leave someone on the table, but I think for the sake of quality, that is probably what we should do.
I think if you ever want to come back, we could finish these up. I think that would be awesome. If you ever want to do a part 2, but I think we got through a lot of like the big ideas here, and I agree.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like, you know, this is, I often ran into this when I was teaching classes that only lasted a set amount of time, or where it's like, you know, something like this, where it's like, there's major time constraints, you know, and we were talking about time, but like time's a really interesting thing for an artist. Like you can make time your ally, or you can fight it. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. Some artists work only a little bit every day, but they work every day. And so they're painting the sum of a lot of slapdash decisions put together in a way that seems like methodical gracefulness, but is not. Other artists sit for long periods and like spin off into details and things. And with teaching, I've found that like if I was working with any one of these students individually, it would be like, let's talk about this, then go and do it, then come back, and then we can hit that concept again, hit that concept again. So spacing out the effort over time with feedback and reps leads to a really strong result. But yeah, I think we touched on a whole lot for the amount of time we had, and in a nice level of depth that hopefully will help even the people that we weren't actually able to, which again, for anybody who's in that boat, I am sorry.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. Do you want to talk a little bit about the goat farm? Like if anyone wants to learn from you more, how could they do that?
Yeah, if you just go to my website and click on the goat farm, it's basically a running training program that's kind of like always going. So how it works is there's a community of people that have been through the program or that I've worked with in the past that all are on a private Slack channel where we talk about work and analyze work and you know, help each other. And it's a community that, like you talked about earlier, is designed to cushion each other in order that we can take risks and encourage each other to take those risks and just try to get better. It's really, I like to think of it as like a place where we're all just chasing potential. You know, I don't think that there is such a thing as the greatest of all time in art because it's so subjective what people like, but you can be the greatest, you know, version of yourself. And that's what everyone there is pursuing. So if you go on the website, my website, tommyarnoldart.com, you can basically get on the mailing list for it. And then when spaces open up in the program, because as you've seen, I like to go more thorough, but my goal is that people actually reach their potential. And I think everybody here, all the pieces we looked at today, even, you know, the Black Adam one came from somebody who's not necessarily trying to be a professional artist right now. I think that they said they were a physicist. But anyone at any level, I think, can improve with the right concepts and the right community around them. So when spaces in the program do open up and there's enough spaces open, I launch a new group altogether. And once you're in the program, you're in the program. Like if you stop working together with me, you're still on the Slack, you still have access to the team you entered with. So this is a permanent thing that I'm growing slowly, person by person, trying to build a deep web of knowledge around these concepts and a deep community, because this kind of thing, you know, a lot of classes, they get clipped off and then it's like all this community I spent time building, the framework for that can kind of fall away. And like earlier when I pointed out that, you know, I have to have this plugin or else I won't change colors enough. Literally, if I turn this off, I still, to now, even though I know how important it is, don't change colors enough. So sometimes the right framework makes all the difference. And, you know, I kind of always wanted there to be like a Top Gun program I could go to as a pro and get better and learn from other pros. And that didn't really, there's some stuff kind of like that, especially at like the semi-pro, just breaking into pro level. But beyond that, I wasn't finding a lot. You can go to workshops and you can talk with your peers, but I wanted to try something. So that's what it is.
I think it's an awesome idea, and having that community is really, really important. I think it takes so much longer, and there's things you just would never figure out on your own. I think also I want to say that spring classes for Underpaint are opening on Tuesday, and
Nice.
I'm thinking about making a big kind of Discord for everybody. So there's individual Discords for the classes, and then I'm going to make one so that after the classes end, we can have a kind of a community that is persistent, like Tommy was saying.
I love it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's already been paying big dividends for us, and I would love to see that as a more regular staple of programs, because the challenging part about that is just you have to have people go through the classes first, right? Or else there's no indoctrination period of this is how we interact with each other, this is how we critique work, and then the community can kind of just become like social media where everybody wants attention on there, and that's not what these kinds of places are for. And by the way, anybody that's considering taking anything at Underpaint, Devin's a mastermind behind all this stuff, and I love how he looks at art, and also he has a lot of integrity about art education. And so I really highly recommend a lot of what they're doing. They're working with good people. I might work with them in the future if we get something lined up. It's hard to find art education where you think, where you know, like you kind of want like, and by the way, he did not tell me to say any of this. He didn't know I was going to say this.
I've got a script on his screen right now. He's reading from.
Yeah, there we go. It's like hard, you know, it's hard because on the internet, it seems like everybody wants to say they're a professional and they know what they're doing. And that's not true. Different people can get you there faster, more easily than other people. What you have to do is trust your teacher and pick the right teacher. And if you're picking people through Underpaint, I think you're going to be very well served. And if you want that super high level, sort of like bespoke touch, proving your work week in and week out, then you can come to me. I mean, I think it's very awesome that Devin and I could do this together because we're both so passionate about art education. We don't see each other as competitors. We're just both trying to build a better world of artists.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, dude, I absolutely mean it. I've been loving your stuff for years. It's so cool to see you.
Thanks, man. It was really great getting together and being able to do this and kind of talk about these ideas together and like bring a slightly different perspective to the same big things that we've been thinking about. So yeah, thank you everybody else for coming and submitting your work. There's going to be another one of these next month. I'm going to announce it probably next week. So we're going to keep the learning going. And yeah, if anybody has any feedback or anything, go send me an email. And I'll be uploading the recording of this hopefully in the next couple of days to my YouTube channel at Devin Korwin. So thank you again, guys. And until next time.
Thanks everybody who showed up. Appreciate it.